Chapter 1793. Granny Jean had been searching for the glazed fire dragon and had intended to capture the divine dragon. Hearing Ronger's pleading, she no longer hesitated and nodded in agreement. "Sai, you have always been calm and collected. Why have you become so impatient after arriving at the blazing mountain?" As she spoke, Granny Jean took Jiayu and Ronger and flew into the depths of the desert. While chasing the glazed fire dragon, Granny Jean did not forget to explain, "Of course I will capture the glazed fire dragon, but I am not doing it to save the white-robed man. Can't you see? That man is chasing an expert and the glazed fire dragon is chasing after them. With that man's means, I am afraid he does not need our help." Jiayu and Ronger did not agree with her and found it hard to believe. "This is impossible. Granny, no matter how powerful that man is, he is only at the first level of the crossing calamity realm. You think too highly of him. Granny, the glazed fire dragon is at the half-step martial sage realm. Only a martial sage like you can subdue it." Seeing that they did not believe her, Granny Jean did not say anything more. After all, she did not have enough evidence and only guessed in her heart. 100 breaths passed. The glazed fire dragon was chasing Ji Tianqing and had reached the edge of the desert. It was about to enter a complicated cave. Granny Jean no longer hesitated and used the teleportation secret skill to catch up. "I will stop the divine dragon first. You two follow me." She instructed Jiayu and Ronger telepathically and teleported 50 miles away in a flash. In the next moment, her body flashed with golden light again and teleported 50 miles away to catch up with the glazed fire dragon. "Evil dragon, don't be presumptuous." Granny Jean appeared above the glazed fire dragon and waved the dragon head walking stick in her hand. Four dazzling golden lights shot toward the glazed fire dragon. Swish! Swish! The 4 golden lights were like sharp swords that fell from the sky and pierced the glazed fire dragon's head, back, and tail. The glazed fire dragon sensed that something was wrong and its eyes suddenly became cold. Its body surged with heavenly fire and formed a layer of shield. Bang! 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 A series of muffled sounds exploded, reverberating fiercely in the desert. The glazed fire dragon didn't have time to dodge the attack of the golden light. It was hit on the spot and fell from the sky into the desert. Boom! The ground that was covered in golden sand was smashed into a crater that was dozens of miles in radius. Sand and stones flew everywhere. The entire desert began to tremble as if a super earthquake had occurred. The glazed fire dragon's shield was destroyed, but it was not injured. It hurriedly climbed out of the deep pit and looked ahead anxiously. Ji Tianqing chased He Yu out of the desert and into the maze-like cave. Seeing this scene, the glazed fire dragon roared again and again, letting out a vigorous roar. It turned its head to look at Madame Jean, its eyes full of hatred. Obviously, it hated Madame Jean for stopping it and delaying its pursuit of Ji Tianqing. Its intense anger and hatred caused its entire body to release a terrifying dragon's aura, causing a shocking hurricane to sweep through the desert. Swish! 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 Dozens of blazing white tornadoes immediately appeared out of thin air in the desert. The endless heavenly fire and the golden sand on the ground were all swallowed up by the tornadoes. A total of 36 golden tornadoes tens of thousands of feet tall spread out in all directions. Suddenly, the desert was filled with sand and stones. It was extremely chaotic. Madame Jean was also surrounded by tornadoes and was in the center of the storm. She was in a dangerous situation. Jiayu and Ronger had just arrived, but they couldn't get close to Madame Jean. They were blocked by dozens of tornadoes. Madame Jean was not flustered in the face of danger. She stood in the sky with a majestic aura and looked coldly at the glazed fire dragon. "Glazed fire dragon, there's no need to pretend anymore. I have long seen that your vitality has been greatly damaged and your strength has greatly decreased. Give up resisting. You are not a match for me. Submit to me obediently, and I can spare you the pain of your flesh. In these thousands of years, you have slaughtered tens of thousands of warriors. You have sinned so much that you have aroused the hatred of the powerhouses of various races. Only by following me can I protect your safety and wash away your sins. Madame Jean held the dragon-headed walking stick and shouted righteously. Her voice contained the power of suppressing souls. However, the glazed fire dragon stared at her coldly with a contemptuous and mocking look. He. You ugly old hag, you're too funny. So what if my vitality has been greatly damaged? In these thousands of years, there are at least 8 martial saint experts who have died under my claws, if not 10. With your strength of the first level of the martial saint realm, you dare to boast so shamelessly? You want me to submit to you? The glazed fire dragon's mouth moved and let out a mocking sneer. Its voice was very clear, like that of a teenage girl, and its tone was full of confidence and dominance. Madame Jean was not angry. She stared at it with interest and said in a playful tone, "You are indeed proficient in the human language and can speak it. Then it will be easy. I come from the ancient sacred clan, one of the leaders of the 5 great profound sections. I have good intentions and will not kill easily. Now I will give you one last chance. Abandon the darkness and join the light, and submit to my clan. I promise you that I will make you the guardian beast of my clan, give you the best resources and treatment, and help you to break through to the martial saint realm as soon as possible." Madame Jin's action was a combination of kindness and coercion. She released the aura of a martial saint to intimidate the glazed fire dragon and promised many benefits to it. However, she underestimated the dignity and pride of the divine dragon. The glazed fire dragon sneered contemptuously, "A mere ancient sacred clan wants to recruit me? You really don't know the immensity of heaven and earth. Even if the 3 martial gods come to invite me personally, I have to think about it. Stinky old woman, you can give up on this idea. Get out of my way, or I will tear the 3 of you to pieces." Alas! Madame Jean sighed with complicated feelings and said with a serious face, "Glazed fire dragon, since you don't know what is good for you, don't blame me for being rude." After that, she made a spell with her left hand and waved the dragon-headed walking stick with her right hand, drawing dozens of streamers in the sky. Draw a circle prison. The 60 or so streaks of multicolored light scattered around the azure flame dragon and burrowed into the golden desert. Suddenly, a colorful cage with a radius of 30 miles appeared out of thin air and suppressed the glazed fire dragon. Madame Jean used the 6 directions to heaven steps and waved the golden walking stick with the dragon-headed walking stick. She kept making secret seals to control the colorful cage to shrink quickly. She wanted to use this secret technique to imprison the glazed fire dragon and take it away. However, the glazed fire dragon also burst out with all its strength. It opened its mouth and spat out a dark golden dragon breath, which hit the colorful cage hard. Boom! Amidst a deafening explosion, a large hole was blasted open in the multicolored cage, and dense cracks spread out from it. The dark golden dragon breath condensed into a light beam and hit Madame Jean, sending her flying backward. Chapter 1794. At the edge of the golden sand desert, there were rows of wide caves. The caves were filled with strange rocks, and the ground was uneven. There were pits, cracks, and piles of rocks everywhere. Ji Tianqing chased after the heavily injured Heiyu, passing through the golden sand desert and escaping into the cave. Originally, he could have caught up to Heiyu very quickly. However, the terrain in the cave was complicated, and there were caves and tunnels of different sizes everywhere. It was also Heiyu's first time here, and he was not familiar with the situation in the cave. He was forced into a corner, and could only escape in a panic, desperately escaping into the depths of the ground. This method was indeed effective. A full 15 minutes had passed, and He Yu had escaped thousands of miles into the depths of the ground, but Ji Tianqing had not caught up to him. After all, even he himself did not know where he would escape to in the next second, or which cave he would enter. Ji Tianqing was even more untraceable, and indeed could not catch up to him in a short period of time. Finally, the two of them entered the depths of the Earth's core. The complicated caves seemed to have come to an end. He Yu, who was escaping in front, suddenly stopped after coming out of a wide cave. His body stiffened on the spot, and his eyes were filled with fear as he looked in front of him, and his expression became ferocious. Ji Tianqing hurriedly chased after him, holding the sword of burial of heaven, and was about to launch an attack. However, when he saw the situation outside the cave, he also stopped in his tracks. Outside the wide cave, there was an empty space with a radius of thousands of feet. He Yu stood at the edge of the empty space, and in front of him was a bottomless abyss. This abyss was cylindrical, like a deep well magnified 1,000,000 times, and unfathomable. This super-huge deep well was straight and steep, and the bottom led to the mysterious depths of the Earth's core, and was enveloped by endless flames. The top of the deep well led to the surface, and was thousands of miles high, and was also filled with endless heavenly flames. The flat ground under their feet was only a huge rock protruding from the well. Compared to the huge abyss of flames, their bodies were as small as ants. Heavens! How could there be such a huge abyss in the depths of the Earth's core? He Yu looked at the abyss in shock and couldn't help but sigh. Ji Tianqing also looked around the abyss and thought to himself, legend has it that there is a real abyss in the world that connects the mortal world and hell. Only ghosts and gods can enter and exit it. There was actually such a huge abyss hidden in the depths of the mountain of flames. It really looked like the legendary netherworld abyss. The power and temperature of the flames here were about 5 times higher than the outside world. This was definitely the source of the colored glass heavenly flame. Could it be that this abyss is the true lair of the glazed fire dragon? Just as he was filled with shock and trying to figure out what was going on, He Yu had already come back to his senses and quietly flew into the abyss. He Yu passed through the raging sea of fire and released his soul consciousness, covering the rock wall of the abyss within 100 miles to search for the cave and the exit. Ji Tianqing was awakened by him. He quickly collected his thoughts and looked at him coldly. Seeing him searching for an exit in the abyss, Ji Tianqing couldn't help but sneer. He Yu, don't waste your energy. Don't tell me you still want to find the exit and escape from here? As he spoke, he pointed at the cave behind him and sneered, I have already checked just now. There is only one exit in the entire abyss. Now you are already a turtle in a jar. You can't escape even if you have wings. Just accept your death obediently. He Yu became even more anxious after hearing what he said. His left hand covered his chest that was bleeding profusely, and his right hand held the treasured sword as he flew up without any regard for his own safety. Obviously, he believed that the top of the abyss was connected to the surface of the mountain of flames. As long as he flew up along the abyss, he would definitely be able to escape from the abyss and return to the mountain of flames. However, how could Ji Tianqing let him do as he wished? You really won't shed tears until you see the coffin. He shouted coldly as he waved the sword of burial of heaven and charged towards He Yu as fast as lightning. Heaven-breaking sword. He held the sword of burial of heaven with both hands and slashed out a sword light that was hundreds of feet long. It broke through the raging sea of fire and slashed towards He Yu. He Yu was shocked. He quickly waved his treasured sword and swept out a few sword lights. Bam bam bam. The sword lights and the sword lights collided, creating a dull sound that reverberated fiercely in the abyss. The sword lights and sword shadows collapsed one after another and burst out in all directions, bombarding the walls of the abyss. However, the walls of the abyss were extremely hard. After the sword lights and sword chi hit them, they didn't even leave a mark. Ji Tianqing's attack failed. He waved the sword of burial of heaven again and slashed out an earth-shattering sword light that enveloped He Yu's figure. He Yu was held back by him and couldn't escape successfully. He could only resist with all his strength. The two of them engaged in a fierce battle in the abyss, both using their trump cards. Suddenly, the colorful brilliance of magic power flickered in the abyss, overshadowing the radiance of the raging sea of fire. The destructive shockwaves dispersed the sea of fire in a radius of dozens of miles, wantonly hitting the walls of the abyss. Rumble. Loud noises and explosions rang out one after another, echoing endlessly in the abyss. The two of them exchanged more than 100 moves before He Yu finally couldn't hold on any longer. His physical body was on the verge of collapse, and his magic power was almost exhausted. He was at the end of his rope. Ji Tianqing decisively used his trump card, becoming one with the sword, and charged towards He Yu with the mountain-sized white tiger phantom. White Tiger Sacred Sword. The giant sword hit He Yu, and the mountain-sized white tiger phantom also drowned He Yu's figure. However, He Yu also activated the power of the innate He Yu formation disc to form a giant shield. Kaboom! Amidst the earth-shattering noise, the white tiger sacred sword shattered the black light shield and sent the formation disc flying. He Yu's physical body was also shattered into pieces by the giant sword, turning into pieces of flesh and blood that scattered in the abyss. After a short while, those pieces of flesh and blood were burned to ashes by the heavenly fire. He Yu's physical body was destroyed, and only his divine soul was left. He fled upwards in a panic. The white tiger sacred sword was also shattered, and Ji Tianqing was sent flying. His face was pale, and blood flowed out of his mouth and nose. His divine soul was also injured. After all, he had fused with the sword of burial of heaven. He would definitely be at a disadvantage if he fought against a tribulation-level magic treasure head-on. However, his injuries were not serious, and it did not affect his battle. Seeing He Yu's divine soul escape, he immediately chased after it, took out the 1,000-meter-tall golden sword, and slashed it fiercely. Bang! The golden sword carried endless divine power and shattered He Yu's divine soul on the spot. The dignified President He Yu, an 8th-stage tribulation-passing martial lord, was killed by Ji Tianqing just like that. He was obliterated forever. He Yu's physical body and divine soul, as well as his magic treasure and spatial ring, fell into the abyss and were burned to ashes by the heavenly fire. Ji Tianqing was also panting from exhaustion. He quickly withdrew the golden sword and prepared to leave the abyss to meet up with Yun Yao and the others. But at this moment, the voice of the burial of heaven sounded in his mind. Tianqing, it's already a great surprise that you can find this heavenly fire divine furnace. How can you leave just like that? Chapter 1795. Burial of Heaven's voice suddenly rang out, startling Ji Tianqing. He looked at the abyss of heavenly fire behind him, revealing a stunned expression. Burial of Heaven, this abyss is actually the heavenly fire divine furnace? It can repair the divine sword? Burial of Heaven said with certainty, of course. Do you still remember the heaven and earth furnace in the eastern sea's returning ruins? Yes, of course. Ji Tianqing nodded and said with a sudden realization, you mean, this abyss of heavenly fire is the same as the heaven and earth furnace, a naturally formed furnace? Yes. Burial of Heaven said solemnly, if you want to repair the divine sword, other than a martial saint expert using a saint-level furnace, there is another way. It is to use this naturally formed furnace to smelt several materials and divine swords. I didn't tell you before because this kind of naturally formed furnace is too rare. I didn't expect your luck to be good enough to encounter a heavenly fire divine furnace here. Ji Tianqing smiled and nodded, of course, this is the mountain of flames after all, the probability of a heaven and earth furnace appearing here is higher. Oh right, if I use this furnace to repair the divine sword, how long will it take? At least 1 day, at most half a month. Burial of Heaven's answer was very short. This. Ji Tianqing hesitated and silently calculated, if I deliberately release the little black dragon and use it to lure the glazed fire dragon, it will definitely find me at all costs. If I repair the divine sword here and it suddenly disturbs us, won't all our previous efforts be wasted? Also, Yunyao and Ji Bai Shohei are still in the desert, I don't know how they are. Burial of Heaven said calmly, I can enter the heavenly fire divine furnace to smelt it myself. If the glazed fire dragon comes, you can do your best to delay it. As for Yunyao, she has the water reverse divine sword, you don't have to worry about her safety. Ji Tianqing nodded and said, okay, I'll send a message to Yunyao first and ask about the situation. It won't be too late to make a decision after that. After saying that, he took out a communication jade slip and sent it to Yunyao. About 10 breaths later, the communication jade slip flew back and landed in his palm. He released his divine sense into the jade slip and immediately heard Yunyao's voice. Tianqing, you don't have to worry about us. The three of us are very safe and are watching the battle in the Golden Sand Desert. The three women were currently fighting against the glazed fire dragon. The white-haired old woman in the lead was extremely powerful. She was indeed a martial saint. She stopped the glazed fire dragon, and the two of them are locked in battle. It won't end in a short time, and I'm afraid it will be difficult to determine the winner. After hearing Yunyao's answer, Ji Tianqing immediately calmed down, and a playful smile appeared on his face. How interesting. That martial saint actually intervened at the critical moment and blocked the glazed fire dragon. The heavens are really helping me. This is going to be easy. After putting away the communication jade slip, he made up his mind. Burial of Heaven, I'll help you repair the sword first, and then I'll deal with the glazed fire dragon. Burial of Heaven replied, that's great. If you help me, I'll definitely be able to repair the sword faster. After that, Ji Tianqing held the Burial of Heaven sword and flew toward the bottom of the abyss. The surging golden heavenly fire continued to emerge from the bottom of the abyss with terrifying heat, rising like a spring. The deeper Ji Tianqing flew toward the bottom of the abyss, the greater the impact he suffered, and the stronger the heavenly fire around him became. After 100 breaths, he flew down about 500 miles, but he still couldn't reach the bottom of the abyss. However, he was already very close to the bottom. Being in the sea of fire, the pressure was extremely great. The terrifying dark golden heavenly fire kept burning his magical power shield, causing dense cracks to appear on the shield. He had to use his magical power to repair the shield repeatedly. In this way, his magical power was greatly consumed, and he wouldn't be able to hold on for too long before he ran out of magical power. Burial of Heaven, this is already my limit. If I go any further, it will be very dangerous. Burial of Heaven said in a serious tone, it's enough to be here. Set up a sealing formation here and help me seal the glazed heavenly fire. Try not to let it leak out. Okay. Ji Tianqing agreed without hesitation. Then, he took out 4 materials from his spatial ring and placed them together with the Burial of Heaven sword. Burial of Heaven sword released a black light, enveloping the glazed true gold of heavenly fire, yin-yang godly jade, golden crow copper marrow, and wind thunder meteoric iron. I'm going down. Set up the formation as soon as possible. After saying this, Burial of Heaven sword flew toward the bottom of the abyss with the 4 materials. Ji Tianqing didn't waste any time. He hurriedly took out 6 fist-sized vacant stones and 8 pitch-black sharp shuttles from his spatial ring. These 6 vacant stones and 8 sharp shuttles were all high-grade tribulation-level treasures used to set up a formation. Ji Tianqing had kept these treasures in his spatial ring ever since he obtained them. He had almost forgotten about them. Today, they finally came in handy. He stood in the middle of the sea of fire and formed a seal with both hands, sending out streaks of dazzling light. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. Under his control, the dazzling light enveloped the 6 vacant stones and flew them in 6 different directions. Thump 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 thump. A series of dull sounds rang out. The 6 vacant stones hit the rock walls of the abyss and embedded themselves into the golden rock walls. Then, Ji Tianqing controlled the 8 black sharp shuttles to fly in 8 different directions and nail them into the hard rock walls. These vacant stones and black sharp shuttles formed the foundation of the formation. After setting up the foundation, Ji Tianqing began to cast spells. He waved his hands and sent out tens of thousands of dazzling lights, scattering them into the raging sea of fire. Not long after, a ceiling formation with a radius of 100 miles was formed at a speed visible to the naked eye. With the 6 vacant stones and 8 sharp shuttles as the foundation, tens of thousands of light pillars formed a huge 5-colored net that covered the entire abyss. Ji Tianqing focused on setting up the formation, interweaving tens of thousands of formation veins. About 4 hours later, the initial stage of the formation was completed. A 5-colored light barrier with a radius of 100 miles was placed in the abyss, releasing a powerful suppressive force. With the ceiling formation as a barrier, the celestial glass fire that emerged from the abyss was blocked inside. As more and more celestial glass fire accumulated, the celestial fire quickly gathered and fused together. Its power became more and more violent. The impact of the formation also became stronger and stronger. It constantly swelled and cracked. Ji Tianqing had no choice but to speed up the casting of spells and desperately perfect the 6 Unity 8 Extreme Sky Ceiling formation to prevent the celestial glass fire from leaking out. However, he was only at the Tribulation Transcendence realm. It was impossible for him to block the celestial fire of the entire abyss with just a Tribulation level formation. As time passed, the celestial fire became thicker and thicker. Its power also doubled. The ceiling formation kept leaving cracks and gaps. It became precarious and could collapse at any time. Chapter 1796. Unknowingly, another 2 hours had passed. Ji Tianqing had stubbornly held on for 2 hours. 70% of his spiritual power had been consumed, and his soul had become weak. Above the ceiling formation, there were only scattered golden flames in the air, and the temperature had dropped several times. Below the ceiling formation, there was an endless amount of celestial glass fire, which had already condensed into a dark golden cloud. The ceiling formation was withstanding an incomparably powerful impact. The 5-colored light shield was full of cracks, and could collapse at any time. Ji Tianqing had reached the end of his tether. He was extremely anxious, but there was nothing he could do. He could only pray silently, "Burial of heaven, oh burial of heaven, it's been 6 hours. Why haven't you done anything?" Perhaps his prayer was effective, or perhaps the time was up, and the burial of heaven was ready. Clang! Suddenly, the crisp sound of a sword came from the bottom of the abyss, and a divine golden light burst into the sky. Then, a majestic and mighty devouring force came from the bottom of the abyss. Swoosh! Below the ceiling formation, the dark golden flame cloud was immediately swept down by the devouring force, forming a dark golden vortex. After a short while, Ji Tianqing could clearly feel that the flame cloud had decreased by 30%, and had become much thinner. The impact that the ceiling formation withstood was also rapidly diminishing. The many cracks on the 5-colored light shield also began to heal and recover. Seeing this scene, Ji Tianqing's spirit was shaken, and he revealed a look of strong anticipation. Great, burial of heaven has finally begun to move. He looked at the bottom of the abyss with burning eyes, and released his divine sense to investigate the situation. Unfortunately, the dark golden flame vortex filled the abyss, blocking his vision and divine sense. As time passed, the flame cloud became thinner and thinner, and the flame vortex began to shrink. This undoubtedly meant that most of the celestial fire in the abyss below the ceiling formation had been devoured. Ji Tianqing could not see the situation below, but he could guess that Burial of Heaven must be smelting the sword body and materials. Very quickly, another 4 hours passed. Below the ceiling formation, the colored glass heavenly flame in the abyss had disappeared. Without the cover of the raging sea of fire, Ji Tianqing could finally see the situation below clearly. He could vaguely see the bottom of the abyss 100 miles below him. It was a sea of crimson magma with a hint of gold. A giant sword that was thousands of feet tall was floating above the sea of lava. The giant sword released a powerful devouring power, stirring up the calm sea of lava and causing it to churn violently, emitting golden flames that covered the sky and earth. But those flames were all swallowed by the giant sword. The gigantic sword was completely crimson in color. After devouring the endless heavenly flames, it had already been incinerated into a crystal-clear state. Not a single trace of impurities could be seen. As time passed, the giant sword continued to devour the heavenly fire, tempering itself. Originally, it was damaged, missing a section of the sword tip. However, Ji Tianqing discovered that the giant sword had already been smelted with 4 types of materials and was slowly transforming into a sharp sword tip. Even though he was 100 miles away, he could clearly sense the destructive power contained within the giant sword. His heart was filled with excitement and anticipation. He silently watched the sea of lava and the giant sword below, waiting for the moment when the divine sword was repaired. But not long after, he had used up too much of his dermic powers and was only left with about 20%. In desperation, he could only fly above the ceiling formation and sit on the 5-colored light shield to recover his dermic powers. After taking a few pills, he held a supreme-grade spirit stone in each hand and circulated his dermic powers to absorb them. Time passed silently. The abyss was silent. About 10 hours later, Ji Tianqing refined a few pills and absorbed a few spirit stones. His dermic powers had recovered to about 80%. At this moment, a dazzling divine golden light rose from the bottom of the abyss. Clang! A crisp sword chime reverberated endlessly in the abyss. Above the sea of lava, the 1,000-foot giant sword rose into the air and flew upwards. At this moment, it had been completely restored. The hilt was mysterious and heavy, the blade was straight and slender, and the new sword tip was also unparalleled in sharpness. When the giant sword left the bottom of the abyss and flew near the ceiling formation, it had gradually turned from a scarlet red to a black color. The terrifyingly high temperature gradually dissipated, and the giant sword kept shrinking. When Ji Tianqing was alarmed, he ended his cultivation and opened his eyes. The Burial of Heaven had returned to its normal size, only 3 feet long. Swoosh! With a flash of black light, the Burial of Heaven flew in front of Ji Tianqing and stopped. Ji Tianqing stared at the Burial of Heaven and immediately saw that the sword had been completely restored. Not only that, the entire sword was surrounded by a layer of mysterious black light, exuding an invincible and transcendent aura that looked down on all living things. In the past, the Burial of Heaven was not complete. Even though it contained great power and had a cold and mysterious aura, it had the aura of a hero past his prime. But now, not only had the Burial of Heaven been restored, but it was also filled with an indescribable divine aura. It was as if it had a life of its own and had completely awakened. Rather than calling it a peerless treasure sword, it was more like a peerless powerhouse that stood proudly between the heavens and earth, looking down on all living things. Ji Tianqing revealed a gratified expression, and his heart was filled with anticipation as he slowly reached out to grab the hilt. When his hand grasped the hilt, a telepathic connection arose spontaneously from his soul. At that moment, many memories seemed to have been awakened, and countless scenes flashed through the depths of his mind. Once upon a time, he had carried the Burial of Heaven and roamed the Shenwu continent alone. From west to east, he had defeated countless geniuses and powerhouses. His style was outstanding, and no one could rival him. Once upon a time, he had stepped onto Tianzhu Mountain alone and accepted challenges from various martial saints, but no one had been able to withstand more than 3 moves from him. Once upon a time, he had carried the burial of heaven and roamed the heavens, discussing the martial path with the martial god and giving pointers to the world. All kinds of memories surged forth like a tide and flashed through the depths of Ji Tianqing's mind. His emotions became complicated and heavy, and he stared at the burial of heaven with a burning gaze. He could not help but murmur, "Old friend, you're finally back." The burial of heaven's valiant aura and the black light on its surface were retracted, and it returned to its ordinary, pitch-black appearance. Aside from being somewhat mysterious, it did not reveal too many shocking aspects. The burial of heaven's voice also rang out in Ji Tianqing's mind. He sighed deeply and said, "Yes, I'm back. In this life, we must not repeat the mistakes of the past. We must slaughter all of our strong enemies and kill our way to the 9 heavens." Ji Tianqing held the sword with his right hand, and 2 fingers of his left hand brushed across the blade. His expression was cold and resolute as he said, "When I return to the spirit realm, those who have betrayed me will be executed." The burial of heaven was silent for a moment before he added, "Don't worry, that day is not too far away. Before that, we must work hard to recover our strength as soon as possible." Ji Tianqing nodded and waved his hand to remove the ceiling formation. He then put away the 6 vacant stones and the 8 pointed shuttles. Chapter 1797. In the Golden Sand Desert. The battle that had lasted for an entire day had finally come to an end. The area within a radius of a few hundred miles had turned into ruins. Originally, this place was covered with golden sand and the ground was still quite flat. But now, the area within a few hundred miles was filled with holes and gullies, and there were broken boulders everywhere. Half of the desert was destroyed, and it was a scene of devastation. Yunyao, Ji Bai, and Shou He hid at the edge of the ruins, silently watching the battle. In the middle of the ruins, there were 4 figures flashing and dancing in the sky. They were constantly releasing spells that could destroy heaven and earth, bombarding each other. The most conspicuous figure was the glazed fire dragon that was 10 miles long and completely red. Its body was wrapped in a layer of golden heavenly fire, and it flew as fast as lightning, releasing the brilliance of spells that covered the sky and earth. However, the previous day of fierce fighting had already exhausted its magic power, and it had suffered extremely tragic injuries. Its power was already very weak, and its body was covered with wounds. There were hundreds of bloody holes, blood grooves, and wounds of different sizes. Many of the wounds were deep, and the bones and organs inside could be clearly seen. Most of its dragon scales were broken, and one of its dragon claws was also cut off. Its injuries were extremely severe. Dark red dragon blood constantly gushed out from its wounds, covering its entire body. Much of the dragon blood that was spilled in the ruins quickly dissipated, turning into majestic and mighty dragon aura that scattered between heaven and earth. Although it was severely injured and was at the end of its tether, it still held on. After all, the divine dragon's pride did not allow it to admit defeat and surrender. Most importantly, it was not at a disadvantage in this battle. The situation of Madame Jean and the other 2 was worse and more dangerous than it was. At this time, Madame Jean was really at the end of her rope. Her clothes were ragged, and her white hair was disheveled like a chicken's nest. Her body was covered with wounds. Dark red blood had already dyed her clothes and white hair red, turning her into a bloody figure. Her magic power was exhausted, and her soul was also injured. She became muddle-headed and could faint at any time. Even the dragon-head walking stick in her hand was broken by the glazed fire dragon, and its power was greatly reduced. Even though she was a martial saint, she had only advanced to the martial saint realm a few decades ago. However, the glazed fire dragon was a half-step martial saint and was also the most powerful creature in the world, a divine dragon. Of course, its battle prowess was extremely powerful. Fortunately, the the glazed fire dragon's vitality was greatly damaged before the two sides started fighting. That was why the two sides were able to fight to a draw. If the glazed fire dragon was in its peak state, Madame Jean would definitely not be its opponent. Compared to Granny Jean, Jiayu and Ronger were in a slightly better situation. The two of them were also heavily injured. Their clothes were tattered, their long hair was disheveled, and their bodies were stained with blood. However, they were too weak to fight the glazed fire dragon head-on. They just wandered around on the flanks to help Madame Jean besiege the glazed fire dragon. After an entire day of fighting, the two of them had exhausted all of their magic power. Their souls were also extremely weak, and their battle prowess had fallen to the bottom. The reason why the two of them were able to survive until now without being killed by the glazed fire dragon was because of Granny Jin's protection. Suddenly, the glazed fire dragon retreated 10 miles away. Its huge body shrunk violently, and its whole body emitted an extremely terrifying and dangerous aura. Black cracks appeared in the sky in front of it, and gradually, a huge vortex appeared. Seeing this scene, Madame Jin's expression changed on the spot. She shouted anxiously, "Get out of the way. It's going to use its ultimate move." Jiayu and Ronger were about to rush up and take the opportunity to besiege the glazed fire dragon. Suddenly hearing Madame Jin's shout, the two of them were stunned for a moment and hurriedly retreated. However, their speed was too slow, and it was too late to retreat. The glazed fire dragon suddenly opened its mouth and let out an earth-shattering dragon roar. Roar! It did not hesitate to exhaust the last of its magic power to release a pitch-black vortex with a radius of 10 miles, which blasted toward Jiayu and Ronger. The huge black vortex was a void storm formed by the void crack, and it had the power to annihilate everything. Even a martial arts saint might not be able to withstand the attack of the void storm. As long as Jiayu and Ronger were hit by it, they would definitely be shredded into pieces by the void storm. There was no suspense. At the critical moment, Madame Jean was extremely worried. She was so angry that her eyes were about to pop out. Evil creature! She cursed in grief and indignation, and rushed over without caring about her own safety, blocking in front of Jiayu and Ronger. At the critical moment, her left hand shot out 2 rays of golden light, which wrapped around Jiayu and Ronger, and threw them dozens of miles behind her. She held the broken dragon head walking stick in her right hand, and shot out a huge golden light barrier in front of her. Kaboom! The pitch-black void storm violently blasted the 10-mile-tall golden light barrier, and an earth-shattering sound burst out. The incomparably sturdy golden light barrier could not withstand the attack of the void storm, and it collapsed on the spot. Immediately after, the void storm blasted Madame Jean, enveloping her figure. Boom! With a dull explosion, the void storm wrapped around Madame Jean and continued to fly forward for dozens of miles before gradually dissipating. A figure covered in blood fell from midair and crashed into the ruins with a plop, splashing countless pieces of gravel. Both Jiayu and Ronger stood in the sky, still in shock. They stared at the figure in the ruins, and both of them looked extremely angry and worried. "Madam!" The two cried out in grief at the same time, and rushed over desperately, landing beside Madame Jean. Madame Jean lay in the ruins, motionless, half of her body buried by gravel. Jiayu and Ronger hurriedly pushed the gravel away and dug Madame Jean out of the ruins. When Jiayu picked up Madame Jean, the two saw clearly that Madame Jean had lost an arm, and her whole body was cracked. There was not a single piece of intact flesh and blood. Her physical injuries were extremely tragic, and she was on the verge of collapse. Her spiritual injuries were also very serious, and she had fallen into a coma, unconscious. At this time, her life was hanging by a thread, and she was hanging on by a thread. "Madam! Please wake up!" Jiayu and Ronger cried out in grief, tears gushing out of their eyes, and their hearts were tightly clenched. But at this moment, the glazed fire dragon flew over from the sky. It stood above the two of them, staring at them coldly, and said in a low voice, "Arrogant and ignorant people, you dare to be my enemy, and you will die without a doubt. The old woman's time of death has come, and the two of you will be buried with her." As it spoke, it raised its huge dragon claw and was about to smash down and kill the three of them together. Although its spiritual power had been exhausted, and its combat power was extremely weak, it had no problem killing Madame Jean, Jiayu, and the others. Seeing the huge dragon claw descending from the sky, Jiayu and Rong'er were unable to resist. Chapter 1798. Whoosh! In the blink of an eye, the 1,000-foot-long golden sword streaked across the sky and reached the side of the glazed fire dragon. Bang! The huge sword pierced the huge dragon claw with a loud bang, exploding with a muffled sound. Golden light splattered everywhere, and dark red dragon blood splattered on the ruins. Although the golden sword radiance collapsed, the huge impact sent the glazed fire dragon flying. It tumbled and fell 10 miles away, smashing into the ruins with a plop, splashing rocks into the sky. The earth shook violently, and the loud noise spread hundreds of miles away. Jiayu and Rong'er thought they were going to die. They did not expect someone to save them and let them escape. The two of them hurriedly raised their heads and looked at the sky. They saw a handsome young man in a white robe rushing over at the speed of light. Swoosh! In the blink of an eye, the young man in the white robe was above them. Rong'er's body trembled, and she stared at him with mixed feelings. It's him. He is not a coward who is afraid of death. He saved our lives at this critical moment. Rong'er was a little excited and murmured in her heart. Jiayu was still calm. She bowed to the young man in the white robe and said, "Thank you for saving us. May I know your name so that we can repay you in the future?" The young man in the white robe was Ji Tianqing. After he left the abyss of heavenly fire, he went through the complicated caves and went back the way he came. When he returned to the golden sand desert, he saw the glazed fire dragon releasing a void storm and severely injuring Madame Jean. He was too far away and could not save her in time. Seeing that the glazed fire dragon was about to kill them, he could not help but help. This was caused by the kindness in his heart. He did not want to repay the kindness. Hearing Jiayu's words, he said calmly, "It's nothing. It's not worth mentioning, and there's no need to talk about repayment. You too, this place is very dangerous. You should leave quickly and find a place to heal." Hearing his words, Rong'er had a better impression of him. She thought to herself, he is indeed a man of noble character. He does not ask for repayment. This is what a chivalrous man should do. Jiayu did not want to give up and continued, "Even if you don't ask for repayment, you should at least tell us your name, right?" Ji Tianqing did not expect her to be so persistent. He had to answer, "I am Tianqing. Are you satisfied?" "Tianqing?" Jiayu nodded and said, "We will remember it. Thank you for saving our lives." Then, she carried the unconscious Madame Jean and flew to the edge of the desert with Rong'er, who was seriously injured. As she flew away, she sent a telepathic message to Rong'er, "Rong'er, this is all I can do for you. That man is called Tianqing. When we get back, let's check his background." As Rong'er flew, she turned her head to look at Ji Tianqing several times, as if she wanted to remember his appearance in her heart. After a while, the two of them left the ruins and disappeared into the sea of fire. At this time, the glazed fire dragon struggled out of the ruins and flew back into the sky. It turned its head angrily and saw Ji Tianqing flying towards it with a sword in his hand. "You despicable bastard!" The glazed fire dragon recognized Ji Tianqing and was instantly enraged. It felt humiliated as if it had been made fun of. Because it was attracted by the aura of the divine dragon released by Ji Tianqing. Previously, it chased Ji Tianqing. It wanted to find the aura of another divine dragon, but it was stopped by Madame Jean. It fought with Madame Jean, but Ji Tianqing took the opportunity to escape. Now that it and Madame Jean were both injured, Ji Tianqing appeared again. It had to suspect that all this was Ji Tianqing's conspiracy. Ji Tianqing stopped 10 miles away from the glazed fire dragon. He stood proudly in the sky. His left hand was behind his back, and his right hand was holding the sword of burial of heaven. He pointed it to the ground, looking like a peerless master. Glazed fire dragon, the person you are looking for is me. Why do you have to kill them? He looked at the glazed fire dragon calmly and said in a serious tone. It would have been better if he didn't mention this. When it heard this, the glazed fire dragon was even more furious. Boy, you are really despicable, shameless, hypocritical and disgusting. Ji Tianqing frowned and asked with a puzzled face, why do you say that? Are you seriously injured and about to die? Have you lost your mind? The glazed fire dragon glared at him with resentment. It was so angry that it laughed and scolded, pretend. You insidious bastard, continue to pretend. Pretend what? Ji Tianqing was so angry that he laughed and looked at it playfully. The glazed fire dragon was so angry that its nostrils were spitting fire. It asked in a sharp voice, then let me ask you, did you release the aura of the divine dragon? Yes. Ji Tianqing nodded. The glazed fire dragon asked, so you admit that you deliberately released the aura of the divine dragon to lure me out? That's right. Ji Tianqing nodded again. The glazed fire dragon sneered even more coldly. It was full of resentment. You purposely used the dragon's aura to lure me out. Then, you ran away and used that old woman to deal with me. During this time, you were hiding in the dark. When the old woman and I both got hurt, you showed up again. What a sneaky and despicable bastard. You're a fisherman who benefits from the fight between the snipe and the clam. Hearing this, Ji Tianqing came to a sudden realization and understood what it meant. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He waved his hands and explained, wait. It's just your imagination. It's not the truth. I didn't run away. I just chased after you all the way to the abyss of heaven flame. As for that old woman, I don't know her. How could she help me kill you? The glazed fire dragon sneered angrily. It's right that you don't know her. Because you don't know her, you despicable bastard, that's why you used her. Ji Tianqing was surprised again. He said firmly, it's all a coincidence. It's a misunderstanding. The glazed fire dragon didn't believe him. It said scornfully, don't quibble. You're such a despicable, shameless, treacherous and hypocritical bastard. Even if I die, I won't surrender to you. Ji Tianqing sighed helplessly. He said indifferently, since you can't explain it clearly, then you can think whatever you want. Anyway, you're now a fish on the chopping board. I can do whatever I want to you. Your life or death is not up to you. As he said that, he waved his sword and stabbed 36 rays of sword radiance toward the 4 vital parts of the glazed fire dragon. Divine dragons were similar to humans. They also had weak spots and vital parts. It was just that ordinary people didn't know about them. Swoosh. 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 The sky was full of sword radiance. The glazed fire dragon was shocked and immediately retreated to avoid it. However, it had used up all its spiritual energy and had little combat power left. It couldn't avoid it at all. Bang! 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 With a series of muffled sounds, its vital parts were hit. Instantly, its spiritual energy was sealed. Its body fell to the ground stiffly. Chapter 1799. The glazed fire dragon's body lay stiffly in the ruins. Only its eyes and mouth could move. Ji Tianqing put away the sword of burial of heaven and landed in front of it. He looked at it with a smile. Okay, now we can talk." How could the glazed fire dragon listen to him? It stared at Ji Tianqing with hatred and cursed in exasperation. "You despicable and vicious bastard, I don't want to hear your voice. I have nothing to talk to you about." Ji Tianqing was not angry. He continued to smile and said, "I think you know that I have no intention of killing you. We are not enemies. If you can calm down, we can talk. It will be good for both of us." "Humph. No matter what you say, I will not give in. I despise you, bastard." The glazed fire dragon snorted and despised Ji Tianqing. However, it had calmed down a lot. Ji Tianqing continued, "Isn't the reason why you showed yourself and wanted to find me because of that divine dragon? Don't you want to see that divine dragon? In the whole Shenwu continent, there are only a few divine dragons. You probably haven't seen any of them, right?" The glazed fire dragon fell silent. It did not refute or curse. After all, Ji Tianqing was right. It had not seen any other divine dragons since it could remember. When Ji Tianqing saw that it was much more tamed, he could not help but smile. He nodded approvingly and said, "That's right. You are a half-step martial sage after all. You should have the bearing and wisdom of an expert." The glazed fire dragon stared at him fiercely and said coldly, "Stop talking nonsense. Where is the black dragon? Ask it to come out and see me." Seeing that it was so anxious, Ji Tianqing was not in a hurry. He looked at it playfully and asked, "You can see the black dragon, but you have to answer a question first. It is said that you have passed through the 8 tribulations 1,000 years ago. With your bloodline and talent, you should have broken through to the martial sage realm by now. Why haven't you broken through yet? Why are you still at the half-step to martial sage realm? What does that have to do with you?" The glazed fire dragon glanced at him disdainfully and said in a contemptuous tone, "I am the king of the divine beasts, the noblest divine dragon. Even if I tell you, you won't understand." "He he." Ji Tianqing laughed and said confidently, "To tell you the truth, no one on this continent knows the dragon clan better than me." The glazed fire dragon instinctively rolled its eyes, showing a look of disdain. However, it immediately thought of something, and the look in its eyes immediately changed, and it obediently shut its mouth. After all, Ji Tianqing had only used one move to accurately hit its 4 vital points, sealing it so that it could not move. Those 4 vital points were very well hidden and tricky, and only it knew about them. Ji Tianqing was also able to accurately identify it, which proved that he was not lying. He knew the dragon god very well. Seeing that the glazed fiery dragon was silent, Ji Tianqing secretly released his soul consciousness to check its body. After frowning and pondering for a while, an idea flashed through his mind, and he vaguely understood something. Hence, he smiled and said, "Little fire dragon, you have passed through the 9th tribulations, but you are unable to break through to the martial sage realm. Based on your current situation, this is very strange, and it even goes against common sense. However, I can see some clues and guess the reason." The glazed fire dragon glanced at him coldly and said in a contemptuous tone, pretentious and deliberately mystifying, "Aren't you trying to use this as a threat to force me to submit to you? Don't embarrass yourself with this little trick. I am not interested and I don't want to listen to your nonsense." Ji Tianqing did not argue with it. He put away his smile and said in a serious tone, "Although you are a real divine dragon, your blood is not pure and it is mixed. If I am not wrong, there are at least 3 types of blood in your body. This means that your parents or ancestors have different blood attributes. Originally, when 3 different types of divine dragon blood are mixed, the baby dragon that is born must be gifted and demonic. After all, when the talents and advantages of different blood attributes are combined, there will be a qualitative change. However, it is a pity that you did not have parents to teach you when you were young, and you could not even come into contact with your own kind. There was no divine dragon to teach you cultivation, and no one who understood the divine dragon to guide you. Hence, you went astray. When the glazed fire dragon heard this, it was stunned and a look of astonishment flashed across its eyes. However, it immediately returned to normal and said in a disdainful tone, "What you have said is not a secret. As long as you investigate my information and records, you will be able to deduce it." Ji Tianqing ignored it and continued to say, "You went astray because you did not have anyone to guide you. You could only rely on yourself and your talent to grow. However, the main reason was that you were wandering in the ruins of God and around the blazing mountain. Due to the special environment of the blazing mountain, the fire attribute blood in your body became unusually active and grew very quickly. You were overjoyed and thought that the blazing mountain was your cultivation sanctuary. You also believed that the fire attribute was your main bloodline. Hence, you worked hard and used the power of the blazing mountain and the heaven fire abyss to grow step by step until you reached the crossing calamity realm and became a glazed fire dragon." At this point, Ji Tianqing shook his head regretfully and said, "Unfortunately, you are wrong. You have 3 main bloodlines and the fire attribute blood is only one of them. As your strength continued to increase, the fire attribute blood became the dominant bloodline. However, the other 2 bloodlines also naturally awakened and became stronger, which began to restrict the fire attribute blood. It is because of the imbalance of your 3 bloodlines that your strength has been unable to increase. You have been stuck at level 9 crossing calamity realm and have not been able to break through to the martial sage realm." The glazed fire dragon remained silent and its emotions had calmed down. It quietly listened to Ji Tianqing's words. When it heard this, it could no longer suppress the shock in its heart. It looked at Ji Tianqing with its bright eyes and let out a cry of surprise, full of shock. You bastard! How do you know? How can you be so sure?" Ji Tianqing looked at it with a smile and said meaningfully, "I have just said that no one in this mainland knows the divine dragon better than I do. Not only do I know the root of your problem, but I also know how to solve it and help you break through to the martial sage realm." If the glazed fire dragon had heard his words a moment ago, it would have snorted and mocked him. However, it was different now. Its biggest secret had been seen through by Ji Tianqing and it was shocked by Ji Tianqing's knowledge. For almost 1,000 years, it had been thinking about how to solve the problem of its bloodline. It had dreamed of breaking through to the martial sage realm. Now that it had finally met a godly person and saw the hope of breaking through to the martial sage realm, how could it not be moved? It looked at Ji Tianqing hopefully and asked carefully, You think? How can I solve the problem of my bloodline imbalance?" Ji Tianqing immediately revealed a triumphant smile. Chapter 1800. What? The glazed fire dragon suddenly came to its senses. All its hopes and expectations were gone. It stared at Ji Tianqing angrily and scolded without hesitation, "Impossible. I am a noble dragon god. Even if I die, I will not surrender to you. I was right. You despicable guy, you have finally shown your fox tail." The glazed fire dragon knew very well that no matter what Ji Tianqing was up to, his ultimate goal was to make it surrender. Therefore, it had always been on guard. Even if Ji Tianqing knew its secret and pointed out its problem, it refused without hesitation. Before Ji Tianqing could speak, a clear and melodious voice suddenly rang out. Which bastard is talking about me behind my back?" As the voice rang out, a ray of icy blue light lit up in front of Ji Tianqing. A furry little ice fox appeared out of thin air. Its body was petite and adorable, and its entire body was covered with icy blue fur. It also had 12 furry tails. It was surrounded by a layer of icy light, exuding a mysterious and powerful aura. Without a doubt, it was Qianyu. The glazed fire dragon's pupils shrank as it stared at Qianyu. Its eyes became strange. "It really is a fox tail. Xian Yu's body was petite, but its big tail was so fluffy that it almost covered half of its body. It flew above the glazed fire dragon's head and circled around it. After looking at it carefully, it let out a mocking laugh. Tisk, tsk. It's a fire dragon. How did you end up in such a miserable state, lying on the ground like a stone? The glazed fire dragon stared at it fiercely and shouted angrily, "You lowly fox, how dare you mock a noble dragon god?" Xian Yu sneered and said in a mocking tone, "Oh. It's a female dragon. What a coincidence. My silly brother, Xiaohei, is not married yet. Little female dragon, I think you are quite pitiful. Why don't I be merciful and talk to Xiaohei and let him marry you?" The glazed fire dragon was full of shame and anger. Its eyes were almost spitting fire. It cursed angrily, "Damn you stinky fox, how dare you humiliate me?" Xian Yu looked at it innocently and explained in a sincere manner, "Why are you angry? I am not humiliating you. I am just pitying you." The glazed fire dragon was so angry that its eyes were covered with a layer of red. The noble dignity of a mystical dragon had been trampled on time and time again. It was starting to get irritated. Xian Yu saw how angry she was, and put on a compassionate attitude. She shook her head and sighed, "Sigh, you little female dragon, why are you as stupid as Blackie? Are all of you dragons so stubborn? Or are you too big and your brains? Just now, old G asked you to follow him. When did he ask you to submit to him?" The glazed fire dragon was Xian Yu dragon was dragon. Moreover, the one who had scolded and educated it was a fox with a lowly bloodline. The glazed fire dragon was even more furious. It wanted to tear Xian Yu into pieces or chew him into pieces. But its power and body were sealed. It could not move at all. No matter how angry it was, it could only stare. After taking a few deep breaths, it suppressed the anger in its heart and shouted at Ji Tianqing, "Boy, ask this stinky fox to go away. Otherwise, we have nothing to talk about." Xian Yu didn't get angry. Instead, she nodded her head and said, "Little female dragon, that's the right thing to do. As a dragon, the most important thing is to know your place. You have to judge the situation and size up the situation. That's right, I'm not a magnanimous heavenly fox. I'll remember what you scolded me. I am waiting for you to apologize to me. Also, if you are not sincere, I will not accept it." Xian Yu said seriously. Then he returned to Ji Tianqing and squatted on his shoulder. The glazed fire dragon was so angry that it almost went crazy. It breathed heavily and cursed, "Damn fox, don't expect me to apologize. In your dreams." Xian Yu did not argue with it. He just smiled and said, "Don't worry. You will." Ji Tianqing saw that the time was right. He said, "Fire dragon, you heard it just now. If you want me to help you solve the problem of the blood imbalance, you have to follow me. Do you understand? You are following me, not submitting to me." The glazed fire dragon was stunned. He asked coldly, "What's the difference?" Ji Tianqing explained, "You just need to follow me. I will try to solve the problem for you and help you improve your strength. I already have a black dragon. I will not accept you. Your master is my wife. Also, you and my wife are friends and partners. You are not master and servant, just like me and the black dragon. Do you understand?" The glazed fire dragon blinked, and a look of relief flashed across its eyes. "You mean, I don't have to submit to you, and I don't have to sign a master and servant contract with your wife?" Ji Tianqing nodded and said, "Of course." The glazed fire dragon calmed down and let out a sigh of relief. Although a mediocre human does not deserve to be friends with a noble dragon god, let alone be the dragon god's master. However, since you know the dragon god very well and your attitude is very sincere, I can consider following you. Obviously, the glazed fire dragon was not used to the change of identity yet. He also could not put down his dignity as a dragon god. He was still looking for a way out. Xian Yu laughed and said jokingly, "What a silly dragon. Still so arrogant. I'm really worried about Blackie's life after marriage." "What did you say?" The glazed fire dragon stared at him coldly. He shouted fiercely, "Shut up." Xian Yu crossed his arms and said with a smile, "Little female dragon, don't think too highly of yourself. Don't feel wronged. To be honest, it is your blessing to be able to follow old G. What you've said today will make you feel so ashamed that you won't be able to show your face in the future. One day, you will understand that your so-called dignity as a dragon god is just a joke in front of old G and me." He. The glazed fire dragon sneered and retorted, "You are just a rank 9 primordial soul realm demonic beast. How dare you be so presumptuous in front of me?" Xian Yu retorted mercilessly, "A dragon who has cultivated for a few thousand years has not broken through to the martial sage realm. How dare you call yourself a dragon god? Are you a fake dragon? If it were me and Blackie, we would not need a few thousand years. We would have become gods within 200 years. The glazed fire dragon scolded in exasperation, "Ridiculous. Arrogant and ignorant. What a joke." Seeing that the two of them were bickering, Ji Tianqing had to interrupt. "All right, both of you, be quiet. Let's get down to business. Little fire dragon, I will tell you how to solve the imbalance in your blood. You have to follow me according to our agreement. What do you think?" The glazed fire dragon rolled its eyes. After thinking for a while, it nodded and agreed. Chapter 1801. Xian Yu smiled when he saw the glazed fire dragon agree so readily. He glanced at the glazed fire dragon and transmitted his voice to Ji Tianqing, "Old Ji, the little female dragon agreed so readily. I'm afraid it's a trap. I think it will pretend to be obedient after you tell it the solution. When the seal is lifted, it will find a chance to escape." Ji Tianqing's expression did not change, but he secretly replied, Xian Yu, you've seen through the glazed fire dragon's thoughts." Xian Yu said proudly, "Of course. With its little intelligence, it's almost the same as the little black dragon. How can it hide from me?" Ji Tianqing chuckled and said, "Don't worry. Since I dared to tell you the solution, I naturally have a backup plan. It wants to play tricks with me, but it's still too naive." At this time, the glazed fire dragon saw him and Xian Yu talking secretly and couldn't help but urge, "Hey, quickly tell me the solution. Are you going back on your word?" Ji Tianqing nodded slightly and said calmly, "It's easy to solve the problem of the bloodline imbalance. You have to stop cultivating the fire bloodline and focus on cultivating the other two bloodlines. When the other two bloodlines are strong enough, the three bloodlines will reach a balance and your problem will be solved. Moreover, when the three bloodlines grow at the same time, your talent will skyrocket and your strength will also skyrocket." The glazed fire dragon frowned and said in a low voice, "Of course I know this. You have to tell me the specific solution. How do I strengthen the other two bloodlines?" Ji Tianqing said calmly, "If you want to strengthen the bloodlines quickly, you need the help of a divine dragon. The little black dragon can help you." The glazed fire dragon frowned again and had a bad feeling. "The little black dragon will help me? How long will it take?" 3 to 5 years at least, and 100 years at most, Ji Tianqing replied casually. The glazed fire dragon was silent. It was angry and hesitant. Originally, it had planned to find a chance to escape after learning the solution. But since Ji Tianqing said so, it meant that it would follow Ji Tianqing for many years. Just as it was hesitating, Ji Tianqing continued, "Actually, you don't have to hesitate or consider, because you don't have a choice at all. I can nurture you into a divine dragon that soars through the 9 heavens, but I can also kill you right now. Cultivating with me will only bring you benefits and no harm. I hope you will consider it carefully." After saying that, Ji Tianqing stopped talking and waited for the glazed fire dragon to make a decision. Xian Yu added, "By the way, little female dragon, before you make your decision, I want to tell you who we are. I believe it will be helpful to you. I'm not a demonic beast, but a 12-tailed heavenly fox, the king of spirit beasts. Little Black Dragon and I followed old Ji for a few short years, but we were able to reach our current strength from the Yuan Dan stage. Throughout history, no other divine beast can compare to such a speed of advancement." After introducing itself, Qian Yu pointed at Ji Tianqing and said, "Old Ji is the #1 genius since ancient times. Even the 3 martial gods are fighting over him. He only used 3 short years to reach the tribulation stage from the soul tempering stage. In addition, he has also created countless miracles, shocking the past and the present." Ji Tianqing stood with his hands behind his back. His expression did not change, and he looked aloof. In fact, he was a little amused. He sent a voice transmission to Qian Yu, "Don't brag too much. The little female dragon may not believe it." Qian Yu said confidently, "My words are 90% true and 10% false. It has no choice but to believe it. Besides, it is so proud. It will only follow you willingly if I raise you higher." The facts prove that Qian Yu's prediction was right. The glazed fire dragon's eyes had a subtle change. It stared at Ji Tianqing and Qian Yu for a while. It was a half-step martial sage expert. Of course, it could use some secret techniques to see that Ji Tianqing was extraordinary. Although it was still weighing the pros and cons, its thoughts were already wavering. At this time, Ji Tianqing opened the sword world again and let the little black dragon out. "Little black dragon, come out and meet me." As his voice fell, a black light flashed in the air, and a black dragon that was 100 feet long appeared. Roar! The black dragon let out a powerful and majestic dragon roar. Its body emitted a mysterious black light, and its body grew rapidly. In the blink of an eye, it became a black dragon that was 10 miles long. It was as huge as a mountain. It flew around the glazed fire dragon twice, and then put its head in front of the glazed fire dragon and greeted it kindly. "Little female dragon, hello. I am the little black dragon." Hearing its greeting, Ji Tianqing rolled his eyes and could not help but cover his forehead. Qian Yu did not know whether to laugh or cry. She showed an exasperated expression and reminded the little black dragon, "Little black, are you stupid? How can you call someone like that? Do you still want a wife?" The little black dragon was taken aback. It said innocently, "You've been calling it that just now. There shouldn't be a problem, right?" Ji Tianqing and Qian Yu were speechless. They could only show helpless and sympathetic expressions. Sigh. These 2 dragons are so stupid. What a perfect match. Poor little black dragon. No one ever taught it how to pursue the opposite sex. It's too late to cram it now. Fortunately, this was the first time the glazed fire dragon had seen one of its own kind. It was very excited and automatically ignored the little black dragon's words. It looked at the little black dragon with shining eyes. After a long while, it said, "I've waited for several thousand years. I've finally seen one of my own kind. Even though you're still very weak, you are indeed a divine dragon. You have the right to be my friend." The little black dragon saw its friendly attitude and its uneasy heart calmed down. It hurriedly asked, "I'm called Little Black Dragon. What's your name?" "Name?" The glazed fire dragon thought for a moment, then said, "Call me Glazed." The little black dragon nodded and said in a solemn voice, "Glazed, I can swear to the dragon god that old Ji is our best companion and teacher. He won't hurt us and will help us quickly grow until we reach the divine realm. You have to believe me. Don't stay in the mountain of flames. Following old Ji is the wisest decision." The glazed fire dragon could choose not to believe Ji Tianqing and Qian Yu, but the little black dragon swearing in the name of the dragon god was too sacred and solemn. It had to believe. After thinking for a moment, it finally agreed. Fine, I'll believe you this once. Perhaps you will be the opportunity for me to change my fate. Ji Tianqing, I'm willing to follow you and treat you as a friend. I'll treat you with sincerity. I also hope that you can fulfill your promise and help me resolve the problem of my bloodline imbalance. After it finished speaking, Ji Tianqing smiled and nodded. That's good. In the future, you will feel incomparably fortunate because of the decision you made today. The glazed fire dragon frowned. It couldn't accept this argument and instinctively wanted to refute. But it held back and said in a calm voice, "Since we're friends, you should undo the seal for me." Ji Tianqing wasn't afraid that it would escape. He waved his hand and released several streaks of dazzling light to undo the seal. Chapter 1802. Although the glazed fire dragon's seal had been lifted, but its injuries were too serious, and its magic power was exhausted, so it could only fly with difficulty. As for escaping, it was not that it had not thought about it. However, after careful consideration, it dispelled this idea. Just as the little black dragon said, following Ji Tianqing was the best choice for it now. Whoosh! Whoosh! The little black dragon carried Ji Tianqing and Qian Yu, and flew over the ruins with the glazed fire dragon, rushing towards the edge of the desert. Ji Tianqing knew that Yun Yao had been secretly watching the battle between the glazed fire dragon and Madame Jean in the Golden Sand Desert. She had the water reversal divine sword and the protection of Ji by Shohei, so she was safe. While he was flying, he was still thinking about his future plans. Unknowingly, a quarter of an hour passed. Ji Tianqing and the three divine beasts arrived at the edge of the desert, but found that the surroundings were empty, and there was no one around. Strange, where did Yao Yao and Ji by Shohei go? Ji Tianqing frowned in confusion and quickly released his divine sense to explore the surroundings. He searched the sea of fire within a radius of 100 miles, but he could not find Yun Yao and Ji by Shohei. In fact, the ground of this region was also completely undamaged. There were no signs of battle. Yao Yao won't leave so easily. She will definitely wait for me here. Even if she has something to do and has to leave, she will definitely send me a communication jade slip. Ji Tianqing muttered to himself, and a bad premonition surged in his heart. He ordered the black dragon and Qian Yu, everyone split up and search, and then meet here. The black dragon and Qian Yu nodded to show that they understood, and immediately split up to search in the desert. Ji Tianqing was still worried, so he took out a communication jade slip and sent it to Yun Yao. He waited for 100 breaths of time, but there was no reply from Yun Yao. This made him even more uneasy, and he felt that something must have happened to Yun Yao. The glazed fire dragon followed behind him. Seeing his serious expression, it asked, "Ji Tianqing, what happened?" Ji Tianqing didn't hide anything from it. He said in a low voice, "My wife and 2 of my guards were supposed to be waiting for me here. I don't know why they disappeared. I had a bad feeling that they were in some kind of danger. Lioli, this area is your territory. Other than you, are there any other powerhouses or ferocious beasts hiding here?" The glazed fire dragon shook its head and said firmly, "This is my territory. How can there be other demonic beasts here? If something happened to your wife, it was most likely the work of other adventurers." Hearing this, Ji Tianqing frowned and a cold light flashed in his eyes. Other than him and Yun Yao, there were only 4 groups of adventurers who entered the abyss. The people of Black Feather Association were all killed, and Granny Jean, Ronger and the other 2 also left. The remaining 2 groups of adventurers had yet to show their faces. Among them, the strongest group was Bright Sword Martial Lord, Chen Yu and the others. Thinking of this, the figures of Bright Sword Martial Lord and the others immediately appeared in Ji Tianqing's mind. Could it be Bright Sword Martial Lord, Chen Yu, and the others? Just as he was muttering to himself, a sneer suddenly came from the edge of the desert behind him. He. You're not stupid, kid. You guessed the result so quickly. Ji Tianqing turned his head and saw a white-haired old man in a purple robe standing in the sea of fire at the edge of the desert. The old man held a golden horsetail whisk in his hand and wore a 3-flower 7-star crown on his head. He looked like a dignified expert. He was Bright Sword Martial Lord. Ji Tianqing frowned. He stared coldly at Bright Sword Martial Lord and asked in a deep voice, "Where's my wife?" Bright Sword Martial Lord stroked his white beard and revealed a confident smile. He said slowly, "Your wife? Of course she was safe and sound. However, this is only temporary. How long more can she be safe? Whether or not she can survive will depend on your performance." Ji Tianqing's pupils constricted and a cold killing intent surged out from his heart. He sneered and said, "I originally thought that since you were all righteous cultivators of the celestial sect of wonders, you wouldn't do such a despicable act. I didn't expect that I had overestimated you bunch of animals." Bright Sword Martial Lord was not angry and said with a smile, "Brat, you can't be so naive as to think that just because we came from a righteous sect, we must be good people, right? He. As long as there are enough benefits, as long as the temptation is big enough, good people will become bad people, and bad people will become demons. Moreover, this is the abyss in the depths of the mountain of flames. No matter what we do, no one will know." After hearing these words, Ji Tianqing's eyes flashed with killing intent. In his heart, he had already sentenced Bright Sword Martial Lord and the others to death. The 5 of them, including Bright Sword Martial Lord, were all dead. However, Ji Tianqing suppressed his anger and killing intent and said expressionlessly, "Previously, we had a conflict. If you want to take revenge, you can come at me. Let go of my wife and my guards. The 5 of you come at me together and we'll settle this grudge on the spot." Bright Sword Martial Lord was stunned for a moment before he raised his head and laughed loudly, "Ha. Brat, aren't you being too whimsical? Let go of your wife and guards? We went through all the trouble and wasted a lot of magical equipment and resources to capture your wife and your guards. How can we let them go? Do you think that we did everything we could to capture your wife just to vent our anger?" Ji Tianqing had already guessed the answer, but he still asked in a deep voice, "Then what do you want to do?" "You already know the answer." Bright Sword Martial Lord sneered and pointed at the glazed fire dragon behind him. He said, "Use that glazed fire dragon to exchange for the lives of your wife and guards." After he finished speaking, he thought for a moment and added, "And the black sword you used before." Ji Tianqing said expressionlessly, "All right, I can give you the glazed fire dragon and the sword, but I want to see my wife and guards first." Bright Sword Martial Lord originally thought that he would refuse, but he didn't expect him to agree so straightforwardly. The words that he had prepared earlier were actually useless. A hint of anger flashed across the glazed fire dragon's eyes as it glared fiercely at Ji Tianqing. It sent a sound transmission and asked, "Ji Tianqing, is this what you mean by treating me with sincerity? We just reached an agreement and you want to give me away in the blink of an eye? You really are a bastard who goes back on his word." Ji Tianqing did not even turn his head as he secretly sent a sound transmission, "Luli, do you know what a delaying tactic is? If you're not too stupid, you should have guessed my plan. There is only one kind of person who can threaten me, and that is a dead person." The glazed fire dragon was slightly startled. It was intimidated by his domineering aura and killing intent. It asked in disbelief, "You want to kill them all?" Ji Tianqing replied with a sound transmission, "Otherwise, how can I calm my anger?" Chapter 1803. Bright Sword Martial Lord thought for a moment, then dispelled the worries in his heart and revealed a sneer of success. Humph. At least you know what's good for you. You know that you have no choice but to obey and submit. However, I still have to warn you, don't even think about playing any tricks. If you dare to have any thoughts of disloyalty, I will let your wife and guards die on the spot. After saying that, Bright Sword Martial Lord waved his hand towards the cave behind him. 3,000 feet behind him, in a wide cave filled with heavenly fire, several experts immediately walked out. The leader was a tall and sturdy old man wearing a golden robe. He had a pair of eye-catching white eyebrows. His attire was the same as Bright Sword Martial Lord's. They were both holding a horsetail whisk and carrying an ancient sword on their backs. However, his left hand shone with a golden light, condensing into a golden net. Imprisoned in the golden net was a woman in a white dress who was as beautiful as a fairy. It was Yunyao. At this moment, Yunyao's face was deathly pale, and there were still traces of blood at the corner of her mouth. It was obvious that she had suffered heavy injuries. Moreover, her hands were tied behind her back, and her magic power was sealed. It was difficult for her to struggle and move. Even her reverse water divine sword had disappeared without a trace. No one knew where it had gone. Seeing Yunyao in such a situation, Ji Tianqing felt rather pained and worried. The killing intent in his heart became even more violent. Following behind the golden-robed old man and Yunyao were 3 dignified young men. They all had the strength of the 3rd or 4th level of the Tribulation Realm. The 3 of them escorted Ji Bai and Shohei out of the cave. Ji Bai and Shohei's injuries were extremely miserable. Their bodies were already badly mutilated, and they were completely dyed in blood. The 2 of them also had their magic power sealed. They were tied up by mysterious black ropes and were unable to move or struggle. Ji Tianqing knew at a glance that before the 2 of them were captured, they must have resisted and struggled with all their might. The 2 of them were so heavily injured. It was most likely because they were protecting Yunyao. Such a scene caused his eyes to become even gloomier. His eyes contained a cold aura of death. The golden-robed elder and 3 young men escorted Yunyao and Ji Bai Shohei to the side of Bright Sword Martial Lord. Bright Sword Martial Lord looked at Ji Tianqing and said with a sneer, "Brat, your wife and guards are all here. You've seen them too. Now, hand over that glazed fire dragon and your treasured sword to me." Ji Tianqing stared at him fiercely and said, "It's only fair that we give you the goods and let you go." Bright Sword Martial Lord immediately sneered in disdain, "Hee, do you think we're trading on equal terms? Too naive. You have no choice but to hand over the glazed fire dragon and the sword. Otherwise, I'll kill them now." As he spoke, Honorable Sword Martial Lord pulled out the sword on his back and pointed it at Yunyao and Ji Bai Shohei. Ji Tianqing knew that the other party was blinded by greed and had reached the point of being extremely vicious. He didn't dare to gamble with Yunyao's safety, so he could only suppress his killing intent and anger for the time being. After all, Yunyao was his biggest weakness, his most fatal weakness. After a moment of silence, he waved his hand and released a dazzling golden light that wrapped around the glazed fire dragon. Under his suppression, the glazed fire dragon's body quickly shrank, becoming more than 3 feet long. In the process of being suppressed, the glazed fire dragon did not forget to struggle and resist. Then, Ji Tianqing took out the Burial of Heaven sword. He held the glazed fire dragon in his left hand and the Burial of Heaven sword in his right hand as he walked towards Honorable Sword Martial Lord. Even though he had been forced to compromise, Honorable Sword Martial Lord was very vigilant and wary of him, unwilling to let him get close. "Stop. Don't come over, just send the glazed fire dragon and the treasured sword over." Ji Tianqing could only stop 3,000 feet away from him. He waved his hand and released 2 golden lights, sending the glazed fire dragon and the Burial of Heaven sword out. Shwa! When the 2 golden lights flew in front of him, Honorable Sword Martial Lord reached out and grabbed the glazed fire dragon and the Burial of Heaven sword. The Burial of Heaven sword did not move at all, as if it was a dead object. However, the glazed fire dragon struggled with all its might and continuously let out roars of grief and indignation. On Honorable Sword Martial Lord's old face, an incomparably proud and excited smile blossomed. Ha ha ha! The legendary divine dragon has finally fallen into my hands. In his excitement, he casually threw the Burial of Heaven sword to Chen Yu. He held the sealed glazed fire dragon and observed it with a burning gaze. The golden-robed elder, Chen Yu, and the others were also surging with excitement. That's great! With the glazed fire dragon, there's hope for our sect to rise. With the glazed fire dragon as our sect's guardian beast, our Azure sect will definitely flourish and our strength will increase explosively. In the future, who will dare to contend against our sect? Honorable Sword Martial Uncle's plan is brilliant. So many adventurers came here and fought for the glazed fire dragon, even losing their lives. In the end, we obtained the glazed fire dragon without any effort. In the end, we have the last laugh. Ha ha ha! The golden-robed elder and the two young experts were all happy and looking forward to the future of the Azure sect. Chen Yu's mood was even more excited and he was even filled with the pleasure of successfully taking revenge. He held the Burial of Heaven sword in his hand and stared at Ji Tianqing with resentment. He sneered and said, "Little bastard, weren't you very arrogant before? Now you continue to be arrogant. Weren't you very arrogant? Don't you put us in your eyes? What about now? Your beautiful wife has fallen into our hands. The glazed fire dragon that you spent so much effort to obtain, as well as your treasured sword, have to be given to us. You must be very angry, right? But so what if you're angry? I like to see you vomit blood from anger, but there's nothing you can do about it. Ha ha ha." At this moment, all the humiliation and anger that Chen Yu had suffered before had been released. His mood was carefree to the extreme. Ji Tianqing ignored him. He didn't even bother to look at him. He only stared at Honorable Sword Martial Lord with eyes as cold as knives. He said in a deep voice, "The glazed fire dragon and the treasured sword have been handed over to you. Now you should let them go." Honorable Sword Martial Lord continued to observe the glazed fire dragon. Without raising his head, he said, "Don't worry. When we leave this abyss and return to the blazing mountain, I will naturally let them go." Ji Tianqing had long expected him to answer like this. He shouted with a sinister tone, "You actually didn't keep your word." Honorable Sword Martial Lord raised his head and glanced at him with contempt. He sneered and said, "Brat, you expect us villains to keep our word? Don't you think it's ridiculous?" "Very good." The corner of Ji Tianqing's mouth curled into a sinister sneer. He did not say anything else. Honorable Sword Martial Lord had repeatedly infuriated him, causing the killing intent in his heart to accumulate to the extreme. He was secretly accumulating magic power. When the time came, he would release a power that could destroy the heavens and the earth. Honorable Sword Martial Lord no longer wasted time with him. He waved his hand and said to everyone, "All right, it's done. We should go." After saying that, he carried the glazed fire dragon and flew out of the desert with the golden-robed elder and the three young men as fast as lightning. Chapter 1804. Bright Sword Martial Lord and the golden-robed elder flew side by side at the front of the group. Chen Yu and the two young experts, holding Ji Bai and Shou He, followed closely behind the two old men. While everyone was flying, they were also staring at Ji Tianqing's movements, constantly on guard against him. Of course, in the eyes of Bright Sword Martial Lord and the others, as long as Ji Tianqing hadn't lost his mind, he definitely wouldn't dare to make a move. After all, they had hostages in their hands. Once Ji Tianqing attacked, they would immediately kill the hostages. However, no one would have thought that Ji Tianqing's counterattack plan wasn't focused on him. Just as Bright Sword Martial Lord and the others were flying through the middle of the desert, the glazed fire dragon suddenly struggled with all its might, letting out a furious roar. In fact, it had secretly absorbed the glazed heavenly flame and had already recovered 10% of its magic power. However, it had been hiding before, pretending that it didn't have the power to fight back. Now that it had suddenly erupted with all its strength, it immediately destroyed the 5-colored light barrier on its body and broke the seal that Bright Sword Martial Lord had temporarily set up. Only Ji Tianqing knew its 4 vital points and could truly seal it. Glorious Sword Martial Lord seal existed in name only to it. Bang! With an explosive sound, the 5-colored light barrier shattered into countless fragments that flew in all directions. Bright Sword Martial Lord's expression changed on the spot. He hurriedly waved his palm to cast a spell, wanting to seal the glazed fire dragon again. Facing such an unexpected event, his first thought was to seal the glazed fire dragon, not attack it. After all, he wanted to obtain the glazed fire dragon and turn it into the Azure Sect's guardian beast. He never thought of harming it. Ong! The glazed fire dragon let out a roar, and its body suddenly became 10 miles long. With a sweep of its tail, it sent Bright Sword Martial Lord flying. Caught off guard, Bright Sword Martial Lord was sent flying tens of thousands of feet away, smashing into the desert. He opened his mouth and spat out a mouthful of blood. Before he could get up, the glazed fire dragon turned into a golden light and fled into the depths of the desert. At the same time, the burial of heaven in Chen Yu's hand also lit up with a cold black light, releasing an incomparably sharp sword qi. Swish! A cold sword light flashed as the burying the heavens sword cut off Chen Yu's right arm with an unstoppable might. Chen Yu's right arm was cut off at the shoulder. The entire arm fell to the ground, and blood spurted out from the wound. Ah! The heart-wrenching pain caused his body to shake violently, and he let out a shrill scream. The successive upheavals caused everyone to be stunned for a moment, and their expressions became very unsightly. No one would have thought that the glazed fire dragon, who was already heavily injured and on the verge of death, would actually be able to erupt with a terrifying power and injure the Bright Sword Martial Lord. The pitch-black sword also seemed to have its own life and intelligence. It cut off Chen Yu's arm with a single slash, and even used a mysterious sword technique to attack the other 2 youths. The golden-robed elder was the first to recover from his shock. He shouted angrily and chased after the glazed fire dragon. Bastard, don't even think about escaping. He held the imprisoned Yunyao in his left hand and a sword in his right hand. He stabbed out a sword light that filled the sky, intercepting the escaping glazed fire dragon. At the same time, the other 2 youths also put down Ji Bai and Shohei and drew their swords to block the attack of the burial of heaven sword. The scene immediately became chaotic. The Bright Sword Martial Lord and the others also lost their composure and found it difficult to maintain their calm. And at this time, Ji Tianqing, who had been accumulating power, finally released a monstrous killing intent and brazenly made his move. White Tiger Sacred Sword. He roared like a large bell and summoned his 1,000-foot-tall primordial spirit golden sword. His body also turned into a golden flame and fused with the primordial spirit golden sword. Swish! The 1,000-foot-long golden sword carried a mountain-sized white tiger phantom as it ruthlessly slashed towards the golden-robed elder with a momentum that could split the heavens and earth. Before the sword arrived, a violent aura that could destroy everything had already enveloped the golden-robed elder. As if he had fallen into a quagmire, his speed suddenly decreased by half. If he still wanted to intercept the glazed fire dragon, he would be struck by the white tiger sacred sword. Even if he didn't die, he would be seriously injured. Helpless, he could only give up on chasing the glazed fire dragon and block the giant sword's attack with all his strength. Swish swish swish. The golden-robed elder waved his sword and slashed out sword light that filled the sky, forming a five-colored sword net to protect himself. Boom! The white tiger sacred sword slashed down fiercely, instantly shattering the five-colored sword net and sending the golden-robed elder flying. His magic power shield was shattered, leaving a hideous wound on his chest. It was so deep that his bones could be seen, and blood flowed out. But even so, his left hand was still holding onto the cage, unwilling to let go of Yunyao. "Kid! You're courting death!" The golden-robed elder roared in rage. Dazzling flames surged out of his left hand, and he was about to kill Yunyao. But at this moment, Ji Tianqing suddenly flew out of the primordial spirit golden sword and arrived in front of him like a ghost, throwing a punch. Star-shattering fist. Bam! A dazzling golden fist landed on the golden-robed elder's left shoulder like a shooting star, exploding with a dull thud. The golden-robed elder was sent flying again, rolling and crashing into the sea of fire thousands of feet away. The flames in his left palm immediately dissipated, and the five-colored light shield that imprisoned Yunyao also shattered. Yunyao fell from the sky, falling toward the ground that was covered with golden sand. Ji Tianqing was already prepared. He rushed over in a flash and pulled the severely injured Yunyao into his arms. Swoosh! Light flashed, and he retreated 5 kilometers with Yunyao in his arms. He hurriedly checked on Yunyao's injuries. Yunyao was severely injured, and her magic power was sealed. But she was not unconscious. She was still conscious. Ji Tianqing made a hand seal with both hands, and more than 60 streaks of dazzling light entered Yunyao's body. In the blink of an eye, the seal on Yunyao's magic power was lifted. At the same time, she also regained the ability to move and speak. Ji Tianqing asked with concern, "Yao Yao, how are you? Can you still hold on?" Yunyao nodded and said, "Tianqing, don't worry about me. I have the divine power of immortality, so I'll be able to recover from my injuries soon." Ji Tianqing asked again, "Where's the reverse water divine sword? Did they snatch it?" "No." Yunyao hurriedly shook her head and explained, "The reverse water divine sword has long been hidden in my mind. Unless they kill me, it's impossible for them to obtain it." "That's good." Ji Tianqing immediately heaved a sigh of relief and felt much more at ease. At this moment, Yunyao caught a glimpse from the corner of her eye. Graceful Sword Martial Lord quietly rushed over and attacked Ji Tianqing with his sword. Her expression immediately changed, and she shouted in a low voice, "Tianqing, be careful." Ji Tianqing was already prepared. Without hesitation, he raised his palms and turned around to slap Graceful Sword Martial Lord. Heavenly Dragon Palm. Endless golden light gushed out from his palms, condensing into 2 golden dragons that were 100 feet long. With an unparalleled state, they fiercely smashed towards Graceful Sword Martial Lord. Bang bang! Before Graceful Sword Martial Lord could block, he was struck by the 2 golden dragons. Blood spurted out of his 7 orifices as he flew backwards and crashed into the desert 10 miles away. Ji Tianqing did not chase after him. He brought Yunyao and flew towards the burial of heaven. Chapter 1805. Now, the burial of heaven sword had been restored to the sacred level. It was a true sacred sword. Under the control of the burial of heaven, the sacred sword used a marvelous sword technique, turning a radius of 10 miles into a sword domain. Chen Yu and the other 2 young men were enveloped by the sword light that filled the sky. They couldn't escape no matter how hard they tried. Although they all had the strength of the 3rd or 4th layer of the tribulation realm, they couldn't resist the strangulation of the burial of heaven sword at all. In just 10 breaths of time, the 3 of them were stabbed by the sword light until they were covered in wounds. It was a tragic sight. Not only did Chen Yu lose his right arm, but he also lost a leg. There were more than a dozen wounds on his chest and back. The other 2 young men were also mutilated. They were missing arms and legs. Their bodies were covered with sword wounds, revealing their white bones. Dark red blood dyed the three of them red. Such a result made the three of them terrified, angry, and terrified. They couldn't imagine that the sword was a dead object. How could it have life and wisdom and even use sword techniques on its own? Could it be a legendary divine weapon? Thinking of this, the three of them felt even more desperate. They had already expected their fate. At most, in a few dozen breaths of time, they would be strangled into pieces and die without a complete corpse. At this moment, Ji Tianqing arrived near the Burial of Heaven sword. Under his control, the Burial of Heaven sword opened the sword world. He sent Yunyao into the sword world and waved his hand to send out two dazzling lights, sending Ji Bai and Shohei in as well. The three of them stayed in the sword world to heal their injuries. Of course, it was incomparably safe. After doing all this, Ji Tianqing turned around and left, charging towards the golden-robed elder and the honorable sword martial lord. The golden-robed elder and the honorable sword martial lord stood side by side in the sky above the desert, staring at Ji Tianqing with resentment. Now, the glazed fire dragon had escaped, and the three hostages had been rescued by Ji Tianqing. Their plan had completely failed, and all their efforts had been in vain. Both of them were furious and their expressions were extremely ferocious. Only by tearing Ji Tianqing into pieces could they dispel the anger in their hearts. Little bastard! You're courting death. If I don't grind your bones to dust today, I'll write my name backwards. Both of them cursed with twisted faces. Their bodies ignited with dark red flames of anger, releasing a murderous aura that soared to the sky. Swoosh! Swish! The honorable sword martial lord and the golden-robed old man spread out, attacking Ji Tianqing from the left and right. Both of them held their horsetail whisks in their left hands and wielded their swords in their right hands, charging at Ji Tianqing without any regard for their own safety. Yin and Yang life-death sword. Both of them slashed out 9 black sword lights each, forming a black and white sword net, which flew towards Ji Tianqing's head. Ji Tianqing fearlessly rushed forward and released his ultimate move with a murderous aura. Azure Dragon Sacred Sword. Once again, he summoned his primordial spirit Golden Sword. His body turned into golden flames and merged with the golden sword. The enormous sword was surrounded by soaring golden flames. It condensed into the image of a divine dragon and slashed towards the two martial lords. Boom! Crack! Amidst a deafening explosion, the Azure Dragon Sacred Sword and the black and white sword net fiercely collided, creating a shockwave that could destroy heaven and earth. The Azure Dragon image collapsed, and the primordial spirit Golden Sword was also sent flying back. However, the black and white sword net was also shattered, turning into sword fragments that filled the sky and scattered in the desert. Even though the honorable sword martial lord and the golden-robed old man were very strong, reaching the 6th level of the tribulation transcending realm. However, when they joined forces to deal with Ji Tianqing, they were unable to gain any advantage and could only fight him to a draw. This result caused the two of them to be incomparably shocked. Both of them widened their eyes, revealing looks of disbelief. Damned little bastard, his strength is actually this strong? Us two martial lords joining forces are actually unable to defeat him? How is this possible? The honorable sword martial lord and the golden-robed old man were a bit stunned, and a storm was set off in their hearts. However, Ji Tianqing did not hesitate. He rode the primordial spirit Golden Sword and charged over again. Vermilion Bird Sacred Sword. The gigantic sword once again released a soaring scarlet flame, condensing into a mountain-sized vermilion bird image. It extended its claws and fangs, and pounced towards the two martial lords from the sky. The honorable sword martial lord and the golden-robed old man came back to their senses. They hurriedly waved their horsetail whisks and treasured swords, and at the same time, used a defensive secret technique. Mystic Heaven Chi, 5 Elements Cauldron Transformation. The horsetail whisk and treasured sword drew out streaks of dazzling light, drawing in the power of heaven and earth as they madly converged. In the blink of an eye, a 5-colored barrier of light with a radius of 3,000 meters was formed, protecting the two of them. Bang! The vermilion bird sacred sword carried the power to destroy the heavens and earth as it struck the 5-colored barrier, causing an earth-shaking explosion. The result was without a doubt, they were evenly matched. The vermilion bird image collapsed, and the primordial spirit golden sword was sent flying. The 5-colored barrier was also shattered, exploding into fragments that filled the sky and scattered in the desert. The honorable sword martial lord and the golden-robed old man were also sent flying, tumbling and landing 3,000 meters away. The berserk shockwave spread out, turning the desert within a radius of several dozen miles into ruins. A moment later, the primordial spirit golden sword rushed over again, exploding with even stronger power as it attacked the two martial lords. The two martial lords were already numb from the shock, and they didn't have time to think about anything else. They could only block with all their strength. The two sides continued to fight, and it was difficult to tell who had the upper hand. At the same time, the battle between the Sword of Burial of Heaven and the 3 young experts was about to end. The 3 young experts were all heavily injured. They were like arrows at the end of their flight, and they were extremely miserable. The Sword of Burial of Heaven decisively used its killing move, wanting to end the battle. Piercing sword. The sacred sword fiercely pierced, and a cold glint lit up at the tip of the sword. It flashed within the sea of flames. In the next instant, the ice-cold and dazzling cold glint pierced through Chen Yu's defense and pierced into his body. Bang! The dazzling cold glint blossomed from his body, and like a blazing white mushroom cloud, it rose into the air. His scarred and incomplete body was blown into fine powder on the spot, turning into a rain of blood that covered the sky and covered the earth, sprinkling into the sea of flames. Even his divine soul wasn't spared. It was directly blown into pieces by the sword glint. The most outstanding young expert of the Azure Sky sect was turned into ashes just like that. He had completely fallen. The other 2 young experts witnessed Chen Yu being killed with their own eyes. They were so scared that their souls left their bodies. They panicked and turned around to escape. The Sword of Burial of Heaven cut through the sky with a whoosh. It teleported several thousand feet away, catching up to a young man. Heaven-cleaving sword. The pitch-black and ice-cold sacred sword instantly expanded to 3,000 feet long. It exploded with a power that could destroy everything as it slashed down. Bang! The young man was struck by the sacred sword on the spot. His body exploded into pieces, and a large amount of blood splattered out. His divine soul was also shattered by the sacred sword. It was mixed with pieces of flesh and scattered in the sea of flames. Soon, it was burned to ashes by the heavenly fire. The last remaining young expert couldn't escape the fate of being killed by the sacred sword. He had only escaped 50 miles away when the Sword of Burial of Heaven caught up with him. Together with his divine soul, he was cut into pieces. The 3 young experts were all dead, and they died without a complete corpse. Chapter 1806. Ji Tianqing was currently fighting fiercely with 2 martial lords. The battle was earth-shattering. The colorful brilliance of magic power enveloped the desert within a radius of 100 miles. The destructive shockwaves were like a colorful tide as they continuously spread out in all directions. The desert of 100 miles had already turned into ruins. The earth was shattered, covered with ravines and pits. It was a scene of devastation. In terms of the strength of both sides, the bright sword martial lord and the golden-robed elder were stronger. However, Ji Tianqing had mastered an extraordinary sword technique and had unimaginable combat experience. His combat strength was extremely terrifying. Therefore, the two sides fought for more than 10 moves, but the outcome was still undecided. At this moment, the sword of burial of heaven finally arrived. Whoosh! With a flash of cold light, the sword of burial of heaven flew to the side of the primordial spirit golden sword. Ji Tianqing immediately left the primordial spirit golden sword and his figure appeared in the sea of fire. He immediately put away the primordial spirit golden sword and reached out his right hand to grab the sword of burial of heaven. The moment the sacred sword appeared in his hand, his entire aura changed. It became even more berserk, domineering, and majestic, as if a peerless war god had descended. One man and one sword, they had long been connected and cooperated with each other with incomparable tacit understanding. They also complemented each other. Ji Tianqing formed a sword seal with his left hand and held the sword of burial of heaven with his right hand. His robes fluttered in the wind and his entire body erupted with an extremely cold aura. Sword of the vast ocean cold. The sword of burial of heaven swung and slashed out a silver-white sword light that was 10,000 feet long like a crescent moon. Swoosh! The sword light swept out, and wherever it passed, the glazed heavenly fire between heaven and earth dissipated. The ground that was filled with ravines and pits also turned from red to white and was instantly frozen. In the next instant, the silver-white sword light arrived in front of the bright sword martial lord and the golden-robed elder. Before the sword light arrived, the terrifying chill had already frozen the bodies of the two people. Their blood and meridians were about to solidify. The two of them couldn't move an inch. They were simply unable to dodge the sword light's attack. Their eyes also revealed deep fear. Bang! Bang! Two muffled sounds rang out almost at the same time. The magic power shields of the bright sword martial lord and the golden-robed elder were instantly shattered by the sword light. Both of them were sent flying back, falling into the ruins 10 miles away. After landing on the ground, the two rolled a dozen times before coming to a stop. Their bodies were cold and stiff. There was a horrifying wound on their chests and abdomens, which almost cut them in half. Some of the internal organs mixed with blood flowed out from the wound and scattered on the ground. The ground beneath them was immediately dyed red. Ah! Damned little bastard, this monarch will definitely tear you to shreds. 300 years. This lord hasn't suffered such heavy injuries in 300 years, but today, I was defeated by the sword of a nameless brat. The pain and humiliation caused the two martial lords to roar. They were so angry that they almost went berserk. The two of them picked up the internal organs from the ground and stuffed them back into their chests. Then, they waved their palms and shot out a dense green light, temporarily sealing the wound and suppressing the injury. At this moment, Ji Tianqing flew over. He stood in the sea of fire and looked down at the bright sword martial lord. He said expressionlessly, "Bright sword martial lord, from the moment you captured my wife and guards and used them as hostages to threaten me, you should have thought of such a consequence. My killing intent has been determined. Only by dying can you quell my anger. Don't make any more pointless struggles. Kneel down and accept your death." The cold voice rang out, filled with a fierce and domineering aura. The bright sword martial lord was instantly infuriated. His face twisted as he cursed, "You little bastard, don't be so arrogant. The one who is going to die is you." As he spoke, his entire body lit up with flames. A crimson sword slowly appeared above his head. This sword was clearly hidden in his mind. It was his trump card, and he wouldn't use it unless it was a critical moment. The sword was about 3 feet long and curved like a snake. The hilt was shaped like a snake's head. What surprised Ji Tianqing was that the sword's entire body was sparkling and translucent. It wasn't a physical object, but was refined from many kinds of special powers. He could clearly feel that the main effect of this snake-shaped sword was to destroy a martial artist's soul. The bright sword martial lord put away his horsetail whisk and sword. With a ferocious expression, he cast a spell and controlled the snake-shaped sword to attack Ji Tianqing. 7 Spirits Soul-Absorbing Sword. Whoosh! The snake-shaped sword was like a streak of fiery light. It instantly pierced through the sea of fire and arrived in front of Ji Tianqing, aiming straight for his forehead. The golden-robed elder also made his move at the same time. He waved his horsetail whisk and sword to attack Ji Tianqing. He was deliberately restraining Ji Tianqing, wanting to create an opportunity for the bright sword martial lord. Ji Tianqing coldly snorted in disdain. With an indifferent expression, he waved the Burial of Heaven sword and launched a counterattack. Ask the heavens with my sword. He raised his right hand and held the Burial of Heaven sword to block in front of his eyes. The fiery red snake-shaped sword stabbed over and just happened to stab the blade of the Burial of Heaven sword, producing a crisp, ding sound. The Burial of Heaven sword was unharmed, but the snake-shaped sword was sent flying backwards. Ji Tianqing easily blocked the attack of the bright sword martial lord and waved his sword to attack the golden-robed elder. 7 Stars Sword. 7 giant golden swords that were 100 feet long appeared out of thin air in the sea of fire, violently slashing towards the golden-robed elder. Bang bang bang. With an earth-shaking muffled sound, the spell cast by the golden-robed elder was shattered by the sword light. He was also slashed by the sword light. His entire body was covered in blood as he flew backwards, leaving behind a left arm and a right leg that fell into the sea of fire. At this time, the bright sword martial lord controlled the 7 spirits soul-absorbing sword and stabbed out more than a dozen fiery red sword lights towards Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing still dealt with it calmly. With an indifferent expression, he shouted in a low voice, "Heaven and Earth Dharma Body." A mysterious invisible force surged out of his body and instantly absorbed the power of heaven and earth within a radius of hundreds of miles, condensing into a dark golden shield. The oval-shaped shield was like an eggshell, protecting him. The 7 spirits soul-absorbing sword hit the shield, producing a muffled bang 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 sound, but it was sent flying back. The shield was intact. Ji Tianqing waved his sword again and used his ultimate skill. Great Freedom Soul Destruction Slash. He waved the Burial of Heaven sword with all his strength, slashing out 3 invisible swords that slashed towards the golden-robed elder 10 miles away. The golden-robed elder was already seriously injured and was circulating his energy to suppress his injuries. He was not on guard at all. Ji Tianqing actually used such an invisible sword technique. Bang bang bang. At the soul level, 3 muffled sounds exploded. The golden-robed elder's body instantly stiffened. He stood rooted to the ground like a stone sculpture, no longer moving. Although, on the surface, his physical body did not seem to have any fatal injuries. But in reality, the 3 invisible swords had already shattered his divine soul. The golden-robed elder's divine soul was destroyed, and he was completely dead. After dealing with him, Ji Tianqing focused on dealing with the bright sword martial lord. After the 2 sides exchanged a few moves, Ji Tianqing used his ultimate sword technique and defeated the 7 spirits soul-absorbing sword. When the snake-shaped sword shattered, the bright sword martial lord's divine soul suffered a backlash. Blood spurted out of his 7 orifices on the spot, and his consciousness became blurry. Chapter 1807. Bright Sword Martial Lord, the Golden-Robed Elder, Chen Yu, and the 2 young experts all died in the desert. Although Bright Sword Martial Lord's plan was very ingenious and sinister, they almost succeeded. They could have obtained the glazed fire dragon and the sword of burial of heaven and become the final winner. But they failed in the end. They didn't understand Ji Tianqing's strength, nor did they expect that the glazed fire dragon had reached an agreement with Ji Tianqing to help him fight back. What was most unbelievable to them was that even an ice-cold and deathly still sword had intelligence like a human, and could actually use a marvelous sword technique. Ji Tianqing had taken his revenge and had no more regrets. He put away the sword of burial of heaven, turned around, and flew to the edge of the desert. Not far away, Black Dragon and Xian Yu were rushing over at lightning speed. Previously, they were sent out by Ji Tianqing to search for Yun Yao's whereabouts around the desert, so they missed this battle. The two of them returned to Ji Tianqing's side and asked about the situation with concern. After learning that Yun Yao and the other two were safe and everything was over, the two of them were completely relieved. Then, Ji Tianqing rode Black Dragon and continued on his way. When he arrived at the edge of the desert, he saw the glazed fire dragon waiting in the sea of fire. Seeing Ji Tianqing's arrival, the glazed fire dragon hurriedly came up to him and asked curiously, "Ji Tianqing, has the matter been resolved?" Ji Tianqing nodded and said indifferently, "I've killed them all." The glazed fire dragon was stunned for a moment. Its eyes widened and it asked incredulously, "It's only been a quarter of an hour and you've killed those 5 experts?" The strength of those 2 white-bearded old men has surpassed the 6th level of the Tribulation Transcendence realm. It obviously couldn't believe that Ji Tianqing could accomplish such a feat with his own strength. This was too unbelievable. Ji Tianqing stopped discussing this issue. He looked at it with a smile and said, "Previously, I asked you to resist with all your might and take the opportunity to escape. You did a good job. Originally, I thought that you might take this opportunity to escape from the abyss and really escape. I didn't expect you to be smart enough to wait for me here." The glazed fire dragon curled its lips and said, "That's because you succeeded. That's why I kept my promise. If you had been killed by those people, I wouldn't have waited for you here. Fortunately, you won. This proves that I have a good eye for people." Xian Yu squatted on Ji Tianqing's shoulder and mercilessly added, "What kind of judgment do you have? Weren't we the ones who told you?" The glaze fire dragon frowned and coldly glanced at Xian Yu. He said in a low voice, "Ji Tianqing, my injuries are too serious. I need to find a safe place to heal." Ji Tianqing didn't want to see it bickering with Xian Yu, so he opened the sword world and took it in. After settling down the glazed fire dragon, Ji Tianqing left the desert with Xian Yu and the black dragon, flying towards the top of the abyss. Outside the heavenly fire abyss, on a mountain peak 100 miles away from the abyss, an icy light shield with a radius of 10 feet sat on the flat mountain peak. There were 3 figures in the light shield. It was Grandma Jean, Jieyu, and Ronger. Although Grandma Jin's injuries were serious, she was still a martial saint. After a few hours of recuperation, she had woken up and her injuries had stabilized. Jieyu and Ronger's injuries were lighter. After a few hours of recuperation, they had recovered half of their magic power and their injuries were not serious. At this time, the 3 of them were standing in the icy light shield, looking at the abyss with anticipation. Jieyu was a little anxious and couldn't help but ask, "Grandma, it's been a few hours. Why hasn't Master Tianqing come up?" Ronger was also anxious and asked, "Grandma, do you think Tianqing is in danger?" Grandma Jean looked at the abyss calmly and said in a complicated tone, "When we left, I had already severely injured the glaze fire dragon and exhausted its magic power. With that kid's strength, it shouldn't be a problem to deal with a fire dragon at the end of its flight." Hearing this, Jieyu couldn't help but frown and said gloomily, "Sigh, we took such a big risk and paid such a big price to seriously injure the glaze fire dragon. I didn't expect that we didn't get anything, but that kid took advantage of it. Although he did save us and I shouldn't have such thoughts, I still feel a little aggrieved." Grandma Jin's expression was still calm and she said in a neither fast nor slow tone, "There's nothing to be aggrieved about. Maybe this is opportunity and fate." Jieyu and Ronger were silent. Grandma Jin's state of mind was so calm that the regret and aggrieved in their hearts quickly dissipated. After a moment of silence, Ronger asked, "Grandma, since you have already guessed the result, what are we waiting for?" Grandma Jean said with a burning gaze, "Wait for him to come out and confirm one thing." "What is it?" Jieyu was puzzled. Grandma Jean replied, "His identity. His identity? Ronger frowned doubtfully and asked in confusion, but he only said that his name is Tianqing and he didn't want to reveal anything else. The corners of Madame Jin's mouth curled up into a smile as she said meaningfully, Tianqing. Don't you think that this name sounds familiar? After her reminder, Jieyu and Ronger were startled and revealed a thoughtful expression. Jieyu suddenly thought of something and frowned. I remember now. This name does sound familiar. I've heard of it before. Ronger turned to look at her and asked, Masteress, where have you heard of it? Jieyu thought for a moment and said in a serious tone, about a few months ago, the divine emissary of Mount God came to visit. When your master received the divine emissary, the two of them talked about a person. According to the divine emissary, the first disciple of Mount God selected this year was called Ji Tianqing. He was a genius that was hard to come by in 1,000 years. Even the divine lord of Taihao gave him a divine decree and conferred him the title of Son of God. Later, that disciple of God represented the divine kingdom of Taihao and participated in the 3 great divine kingdoms exchange. He won first place and was hailed as the top genius of the continent. Unfortunately, after the exchange, that genius left the divine kingdom of Taihao. Hearing this, Ronger revealed a shocked expression and said in disbelief, There's such a genius? His name is Ji Tianqing? Masteress, then why did he leave the divine kingdom of Taihao? Where did he go? Jieyu frowned and said in a strange tone, At that time, your master and the divine emissary were talking. When I went in to pour tea, I heard these words. I don't know where Ji Tianqing went or why he left. After saying this, Jieyu looked at Grandma Jean and asked with a burning gaze, Grandma, do you mean that Mr. Tianqing is very likely to be the first disciple of Mount God? Chapter 1808. Jieyu and Ronger were both silent. Their hearts were filled with shock and anticipation. They also wanted to know if Mr. Tianqing in the Abyss was the legendary #1 prodigy of the continent. Ronger's mood was even more complicated, and her eyes kept changing. Previously, when she saw Yunyao, she felt a little ashamed of her inferiority and retreated. If Mr. Tianqing was really the #1 prodigy of the continent, the last hope in her heart would be destroyed. She did not dare to hope that she would be favored by the #1 prodigy. After hesitating for a long time, she asked Grandma Jean in a low voice, Grandma, do you know why Ji Tianqing left the God nation? Where did he go? Grandma Jean nodded slightly and looked at her with a complicated expression. She said in a low voice, It is said that Ji Tianqing went to the Luoshui God nation after leaving the vast God nation. He wanted to reunite with his wife. His wife is not only the goddess of the Luoshui God nation, but also a peerless beauty. Ronger's body stiffened when she heard this news. She was stunned. Her face was pale, and her mind was in a mess. Many thoughts flashed through her mind. He actually has a wife, and a peerless beauty? In order to reunite with his wife, he gave up his identity as the Son of God and went to the Luoshui God nation? At this moment, Yunyao's figure involuntarily appeared in her mind. She actually envied Yunyao. She envied her for having a husband who loved her so much and was willing to give up everything for her. After a long time, Ronger calmed down and her expression returned to normal. However, the last trace of hope in her heart was destroyed, and her eyes dimmed. Grandma, Masteress, since we have already guessed that Mr.'s identity, we don't have to wait any longer, right? If there is nothing else, let's leave now. Grandma Jean glanced at her, and there was a trace of pity in her kind eyes. However, she only sighed silently and did not say anything. Jieyu patted Ronger's shoulder and comforted her, Ronger, fate has always been determined by the heavens. Some things can't be forced. Just treat him as a shooting star that flashed before your eyes. I understand. Ronger replied in low spirits. She lowered her head and didn't say anything else. Jiayu and Madame Jean both stared at the abyss and waited patiently. Not long after, a huge black figure flew out from the abyss. It was a huge black dragon with a very majestic appearance. On the broad back of the dragon stood a handsome young man in white robes. When Granny Jean and Jiayu saw the black dragon appear, their expressions changed and their pupils shrank. Black dragon? That's not right. The dragon we dealt with before was clearly a glazed fire dragon. Jiayu exclaimed in shock. Madame Jean quickly reminded him, this black dragon should be his original pet. It has nothing to do with the glazed fire dragon. Jiayu was even more shocked and exclaimed in disbelief, he already has a black dragon? Now that he had the glazed fire dragon, wouldn't he have two divine dragons? Even our divine Lord Taihao might not have two divine dragons, right? Madame Jean didn't answer. With a leap, she flew above the abyss and blocked Black Dragon's path. The Black Dragon was blocked and had to stop above the abyss. Ji Tianqing stood on the dragon's back and looked calmly at the person blocking his way. Seeing that the person blocking his way was Madame Jean, he couldn't help but frown and think to himself, as expected of a martial saint, she woke up so quickly. She seems to be waiting for me here. What does she want? Does she want to take back the glazed fire dragon? Thinking of this, he cupped his hands and bowed to Madame Jean and said expressionlessly, Senior, why are you stopping me? Madame Jean also cupped her hands and bowed to him and said calmly, I have been waiting for you for a long time. I am relieved to see you safe and sound. You don't have to worry. I have no evil intentions to stop you. I just want to ask you a question. I hope you can answer truthfully. Ji Tianqing nodded slightly and said, Please ask. Madame Jean stared at him sharply and asked in a solemn tone, May I ask if your surname is Ji? Ji Tianqing immediately frowned and looked at her solemnly, silently weighing his options. She actually guessed that my surname is Ji? Has she heard of my name or achievements? That shouldn't be the case. The Shenwu continent is so vast, and I am not as well known as the three martial gods, right? For a moment, he couldn't figure out Madame Jean's thoughts. Seeing that he was silent, Madame Jean revealed a kind smile and explained, Don't worry, young master. We are from the Taihao Divine Kingdom and came from an ancient sacred sect. We are one of the leaders of the Xian sect. Our sect has some connections with Mount God Bestowment and has interacted with several divine envoys, so we know a thing or two about Mount God Bestowment. Hearing her words, Ji Tianqing understood and nodded, so that's how it is. That's right, I am Ji Tianqing. After hearing his answer, Madame Jin's eyes flashed, and she immediately said to herself, It really is him. Jia Yu was also somewhat excited and muttered to herself, No wonder he is so monstrous and can attract 9 heavenly tribulations and smoothly pass through them. It turns out that he is the continent's #1 genius. Only Ronger quietly lowered her head, not daring to look up at Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing looked at Madame Jean and asked, I have answered Senior's question truthfully. Can Senior step aside? Madame Jean revealed a kind smile and hurriedly cupped her hands in greeting, This old one has been presumptuous, please don't take offense, young Master Ji. Although young Master Ji has left the Divine Kingdom, Mount God Bestowment and the Taihao Divine Kingdom will always welcome you back. Ji Tianqing looked deeply at Madame Jean and nodded, If there is a chance in the future, I will return to the Taihao Divine Kingdom. Madame Jean had achieved her goal, so she revealed a satisfied smile and cupped her hands, This seat will not disturb you any further. Farewell, young Master Ji. Senior is too polite. Ji Tianqing cupped his hands in return before riding the black dragon into the sky and leaving at lightning speed. Madame Jean waited until the black dragon's figure disappeared into the horizon before withdrawing her gaze and leaving with Jiayu and Ronger. After leaving the Mountain of Flames, Ji Tianqing sped through the divine ruins and rushed back to the Luoshui Divine Kingdom. Xian Yu and the Black Dragon returned to the Sword World and went into seclusion to cultivate, preparing to break through to the tribulation stage. Yunyao, Ji Bai Shohei, and the Glazed Fire Dragon were all recuperating in the peaceful Earth City. After a full 50 days, Ji Tianqing returned to the Luotian mountain covered in dust. After returning to the Cloud Water Palace, which he had been away from for a long time, he opened the Sword World and let Yunyao fly out. Yunyao's injuries had healed long ago, and after more than a month of cultivation, her strength had steadily increased. The Glazed Fire Dragon's injuries were no longer serious, but it still needed a few more years to recover its vitality. Thus, Yunyao brought the Glazed Fire Dragon into a secret room and used the immortal divine power to heal its injuries and quickly recover its vitality. Chapter 1809. Ji Tianqing was tired after traveling for more than a month. He reminded the Golden Dragon and Black Eagle before entering the secret room to meditate. After resting for 3 days, his mind power and magic power had recovered to their peak. Then, he took out a golden jade bottle from his spatial ring and observed it. This jade bottle was called the Glazed Bottle. It was a treasure that Hongqing Tian had given him. When Ji Tianqing found the remnant soul of the White Dragon God in the ruins of God, he stored it in the glazed bottle and used many spirit stones and resources to nourish it. He knew that it would take more than 3 to 5 years to awaken the remnant soul of the White Dragon God. Therefore, he did not check the situation of the remnant soul in the past half a year. Now that he took out the glazed bottle and carefully examined it, he found that the remnant soul of the White Dragon God had changed. 90% of the cultivation resources he had put in the bottle had disappeared. There was not much left. The weak remnant soul seemed to have become stronger after absorbing a large amount of cultivation resources. The energy ripples of the remnant soul were not as weak as before. They had become very stable. However, he was still thousands of miles away from awakening and being reborn. Even so, Ji Tianqing's spirits were lifted and he felt gratified. The remnant soul of the White Dragon God is indeed slowly becoming stronger. This means that my method is effective. He muttered to himself and took out a large amount of cultivation resources from his spatial ring and put them into the glazed bottle. According to his estimates, the cultivation resources he put in this time were enough for the remnant soul of the White Dragon to absorb for a year. After dealing with this matter, he put away the glazed bottle and entered the Sword World to check on the situation of Peaceful Soil City. Previously, when he was digging for black gold copper in the Flame Mountain, he had captured a Xitigarbha divine armor. That Xitigarbha divine armor was an ancient beast with the bloodline of a divine beast. Its attributes and effects were very compatible with the Earth Spirit race. Therefore, Ji Tianqing gave the Xitigarbha divine armor to the Earth Spirit race for the Golden Mountain King to deal with. Whoosh! With a flash of golden light, Ji Tianqing's origin spirit entered the Sword World and arrived at Peaceful Soil City. After he entered the city lord's mansion, the guards hurriedly bowed and led him to the Jinshan King's study. Not long after, the Jinshan King hurried over. After bowing respectfully, the Jinshan King asked with a smile, "Sir, why have you come to Unta City today? Do you have any orders?" Ji Tianqing waved his hand and said, "I don't have any orders. I just want to ask, how are you guys handling the Xitigarbha divine armor?" The Jinshan King was overjoyed at the mention of the Xitigarbha godly armor. He quickly replied, "Young master, after you gave me the Xitigarbha godly armor, I gathered all the warriors of my tribe and built an altar to perform the blood spirit secret art. It took us 12 days and the blood and sweat of over 6,000 of our people to sign a contract with it and make it the guardian beast of our clan. Now, its injuries and strength have recovered, but it won't resist or harm us. It's been working hard, combing the terrain day and night, collecting gold and stones, and cultivating mineral veins." Hearing this, Ji Tianqing was relieved. He nodded and said, "That's good. The Xitigarbha godly armor is the overlord of this land. It's very likely to become a divine beast in the future. With it managing the land of this small world, I'll have less to worry about. The two chatted for a while more before the Jinshan king brought Ji Tianqing out of the city lord's mansion and flew to a mountain range hundreds of miles away. When they were still hundreds of miles away, Ji Tianqing saw that the mountain range was shaking, and there were rumbling sounds coming from underground. Without waiting for him to ask, the Jinshan king took the initiative to explain. Yesterday, the Xiaofan godly armor reported to me that it thinks the terrain of this mountain range is not good. It's impossible to gather wind and water here, and it's also difficult to gather the power of gold and stone to form mineral veins. It's also impossible to become a land of spiritual veins. Therefore, it wants to sort out the direction and foundation of the mountain range and change the terrain, making it easier to form mineral veins. Ji Tianqing flew to the vicinity of the mountain range and released his divine sense to explore the underground. Sure enough, the huge black beast was dozens of miles deep underground. It was quickly moving the rock layers and soil, changing the terrain of the mountain range little by little. He observed for a while and saw that there was nothing wrong with the Xiaofan godly armor. Then, he left with the Jinshan king. After returning to the city lord's mansion, Ji Tianqing was about to leave the sword world. However, at this moment, in the sky above a towering mountain range 800 miles away from the city, there was a sudden gust of wind and black clouds. Ji Tianqing and the Jinshan king sensed that something was wrong and hurried over. When they got closer, Ji Tianqing saw that the black clouds were forming a vortex, and there were flashes of lightning. He immediately frowned and said with a solemn face, "This is the tribulation cloud. Who's going to pass the tribulation?" As he said, he looked up at the mountain in front of him. At the top of the mountain, there stood a celestial fox, whose body was ice blue. It was Qianyu. Qianyu stood calmly at the top of the mountain, swaying its 12 giant tails gently, and looked up at the sky with shining eyes. A layer of hazy ice blue brilliance enveloped its body, exuding a powerful and mysterious aura. Ji Tianqing quickly asked, "Qianyu, how did your tribulation come so quickly?" When Qianyu heard his voice, it quickly turned its head and replied, Of course, it's because of the divine stone of summoning moon." Ji Tianqing nodded and asked, "How's your preparation? Are you confident?" Qianyu said without hesitation, "Of course, I'm confident. It's not the first time I'm going to pass the tribulation. Old Ji, when I reach the crossing calamity stage, the speed of refining the divine stone of summoning moon will be faster, and my strength will soar rapidly. You and Yunyao have to work harder. Don't let me surpass you, or you'll lose face." "Humph. How arrogant." Ji Tianqing scolded, "Don't get carried away. Be careful. Don't make any mistakes." Yes, I know." Qianyu nodded to show that it understood. After a while, a huge tribulation cloud vortex formed, and everything within 100 miles turned dark. In the dark vortex, the first heavenly thunder was formed. Kaboom! Along with the sound of thunder, a 500-foot-long blue thunderbolt struck down from the sky towards Qianyu. Qianyu was fearless in the face of the terrifying heavenly thunder. It raised its head and spat out an ice blue light beam towards the heavenly thunder. Bam! In the loud noise, the heavenly thunder and the ice blue light beam collided and collapsed at the same time. The first heavenly thunder was easily neutralized by Qianyu. Then, the second and third heavenly thunder came one after another. Qianyu imitated Ji Tianqing and Yunyao's method of tribulation, and used powerful attacks to resist the power of the heavenly thunder. Chapter 18:10. The commotion caused by Qianyu's tribulation was so loud that it could be seen from a few thousand miles away. The people of Anyu City were alerted. Many Earth Spirit race experts came to watch. Not long after, Black Dragon, who was in seclusion deep in the mountain range, and ancestor Sanju also came to check on the situation. More than 30 experts stood behind Ji Tianqing, watching Qian Yu's tribulation with excitement. Qian Yu's strength was indeed powerful. It neutralized the first 3 bolts of lightning without any effort. However, it still couldn't be compared to Ji Tianqing and Yun Yao. When the 4th bolt of lightning struck, it couldn't defeat it anymore. It could only use defensive methods. When the 5th bolt of lightning struck, it used all of its innate abilities to barely block it. When the 6th bolt of lightning struck, its defensive mystic arts were also useless. It could only neutralize 60% of the power. Without a doubt, it was heavily injured by the lightning. Its body was charred black with blood flowing out. Ji Tianqing thought that Qian Yu would have succeeded after the 6th bolt of lightning. However, he didn't expect that the tribulation cloud vortex would change and send down the 7th bolt of lightning. The 1,000-foot-long bolt of lightning struck, but it didn't make any loud noise. The blood-red lightning sealed Qian Yu, making it unable to move. Its eyes were closed as if it had fallen into a deep sleep. Ji Tianqing knew that it was the inner demon tribulation. I didn't expect Qian Yu to attract 7 bolts of lightning and the inner demon tribulation. It seems that the heavenly fox's bloodline talent is not inferior to the divine beast's. It will definitely reach the immortal state in the future. He murmured to himself, feeling worried for Qian Yu. Black Dragon also looked at Qian Yu with a serious expression. Ji Tianqing looked at it and said, "It's a good thing that Qian Yu is going through the tribulation before you. It can help you gain some experience. You should be going through your tribulation soon. Watch carefully so that you can deal with it in the future." Black Dragon nodded and said in a low voice, "I understand the first 6 bolts of lightning. I'm confident that I can overcome them. The key is the 7th bolt of lightning. I can't figure it out. Old Ji, can you give me some advice?" Ji Tianqing thought for a moment and said, "The 7th heavenly thunder is the inner demon tribulation, which can only be triggered by creatures with supreme aptitude. However, the inner demon tribulation was very mysterious and rare. It was untraceable and hard to grasp. Everyone's inner demon tribulation was different, so it was hard to provide useful experiences and solutions. However, there was one thing that was certain: the inner demon tribulation was born to target one's weakness and heart not. You have to remember that the inner demon tribulation doesn't test your strength and defense, but your soul and temperament. Those who are weak, indecisive, and have obvious flaws and weaknesses will find it difficult to resolve the inner demon tribulation." The Black Dragon listened attentively and enjoyed it. Unknowingly, an hour had passed. The blood-red brilliance that enveloped Qian Yu finally dissipated, and the tribulation cloud vortex in the sky also gradually dissipated. Very clearly, Qian Yu successfully resolved the inner demon tribulation and successfully passed the heavenly tribulation. It opened its eyes and revealed a confident smile. Then, the tribulation cloud vortex in the sky turned into a ball of divine golden light and poured into its body. Under the baptism of the divine golden light, its injuries quickly healed, and its magic power also quickly recovered. Not only that, its body was also undergoing changes, and its strength was rapidly increasing. In just a short 100 breaths, its strength had increased by 5 times, and it naturally reached the first stage of the tribulation transcendence realm. The Black Dragon and Old Ancestor 3 Absolutes immediately cheered excitedly, feeling happy for Qian Yu. Qian Yu was like a general returning victorious, bathed in the joy and glory of victory, and came in front of everyone. Everyone congratulated it for successfully passing the tribulation. Ji Tianqing also reminded it to guard against arrogance and rashness, and to continue to cultivate diligently. Half an hour later, everyone dispersed. Qian Yu returned to peaceful Earth City and continued to cultivate in seclusion. Ji Tianqing also left the Sword World, and his primordial spirit returned to its original position, meditating in the secret room. After a while, the Black Eagle's voice came from outside the secret room. "Young master, Granny Long is here to see you." Hearing this, Ji Tianqing got up and walked out of the secret room. When he entered the living room, Granny Long was sitting at the table drinking tea. Seeing him come, Granny Long put down the teacup and pretended to be angry. "Tianqing, you and Yunyao have been gone for a few months. Why didn't you say hello to this old woman when you came back? If it weren't for the guards who came to report the news, this old woman would still be in the dark." Ji Tianqing smiled and said, "We were negligent. Please forgive us, Granny." Granny Long smiled and waved her hand. "Forget it, this old woman is not here to criticize you. This old woman is relieved that you have returned safely. By the way, did the two of you go to the Flaming Mountain this time? Did you see the glazed fire dragon?" Ji Tianqing smiled and nodded. "Although the trip to the Flaming Mountain this time was full of danger, we gained a lot. It was very successful." Then, he roughly recounted the experience of the trip to the Flaming Mountain. After hearing this, Granny Long was very excited and happy. She said, "Good," 3 times. "That's great. The two of you can really create miracles. You actually managed to subdue the glazed fire dragon. Now that Yunyao has the reverse water divine sword and the glazed fire dragon, it can be said that she is like a tiger that has grown wings. She will definitely grow rapidly." After talking about this matter, Granny Long talked about another matter. "Tianqing, later tell Yunyao that half a year's time is up. Divine official Luoli has also finished refining the holy elixir. She is currently on the way and will arrive at the Luotian mountain in 3 days." After her reminder, Ji Tianqing remembered that the time was indeed up. "Okay, Granny. Don't worry, I will tell Yunyao to be ready." Granny Long said a few more words before getting up and leaving. 3 days passed quickly. Early in the morning, Ji Tianqing and Yunyao were ready and waiting in the Cloud Water Palace. As the sun rose from the east, an exquisite and beautiful flying boat landed on the peak of the Luotian mountain. Luoli, who was dressed in luxurious clothes, walked out of the flying boat and went straight to the Cloud Water Palace. After Ji Tianqing and Yunyao greeted her, they led her into the living room. After the two of them sat down, Luoli looked at Ji Tianqing and Yunyao with a surprised and shocked expression. "I haven't seen you for half a year, but the two of you have already broken through to the tribulation stage?" Luoli could accept and believe that Yunyao had broken through to the tribulation stage. However, Ji Tianqing had also reached the tribulation stage. This made her feel incredulous and shocked. After a while, she suppressed the shock in her heart and said, "Yao Yao, fortunately, I did not disappoint you. I have already refined the holy elixir to heal you. This time, I have brought it to you. However, before I take the medicine, I have to check your physical condition first." "Okay, thank you." Yunyao smiled and nodded. Luoli glanced at Ji Tianqing. She wanted to ask him to leave for a while like last time. However, she hesitated and did not say anything. She silently took out the medicine box and used a secret technique to check on Yunyao's condition. After a while, she suddenly detected that there was a life aura hidden in Yunyao's body. Chapter 1811. The sudden exclamation shocked Ji Tianqing and Yunyao. Both of them frowned and stared at Luoli anxiously. "Luoli, what's wrong? Is there a problem?" "Divine official Luo, how's Yao Yao's condition?" Luoli's body stiffened as she stared at Yunyao. She was speechless for a moment. This accidental discovery also shocked her, causing her to feel a little flustered. At this moment, many thoughts flashed through her mind and intertwined with each other. But in the end, she took a few deep breaths and forced herself to calm down. "It's nothing. Let me check again to be sure." Luoli waved her hand with a complicated expression. She lowered her head and continued to cast the secret technique. She didn't dare to look at Ji Tianqing and Yun Yao's eyes. She was very nervous and was afraid that her eyes would reveal something. But her abnormal reaction just now had made Ji Tianqing and Yun Yao suspicious. Both of them looked at her doubtfully and waited for her to give the final answer. This time, Luo Li was very serious and careful. But the result was still the same. There was indeed a life force in Yun Yao's body. Although that life was still a little small and hadn't even grown up yet, it was real. But she was real, and her life aura was very strong and vigorous, containing a mysterious and extraordinary power. Luo Li was curious and wanted to check the little life's condition. But when her divine sense came into contact with the little life, it was bounced off. There was a layer of powerful and mysterious power that tightly wrapped around the little life, protecting and nurturing it. Luo Li could only retract her divine sense and stop casting the secret technique. Ji Tianqing was very worried about Yun Yao's condition and couldn't wait to ask, "Divine Official Luo, how's Yao Yao's condition?" Luo Li glanced at him and said calmly, "The red fruit you gave me back then was very effective. I used the pill refined from the cinnabar fruit to stabilize Yao Yao's injuries. On top of that, Yao Yao had also assimilated a longevity divine pearl, greatly enhancing her life force and stabilizing her soul. Today, I've brought along a carefully refined panacea. As long as Yao Yao consumes it and recuperates for a month, the problem of her missing soul will be solved." As she spoke, Luo Li took out a small white jade bottle from her medicine box and placed it on the table beside her. Inside the exquisite and beautiful white jade bottle, there was a fiery red pill. It was the sacred medicine that she had painstakingly refined. Ji Tianqing looked at the white jade bottle, then looked at Luo Li and said in a serious tone, "Divine Official Luo, other than this, do you have anything else to say? Your expression changed greatly just now. What's going on? Is something wrong with Yao Yao's body?" Luo Li furrowed her brows and remained silent as she weighed the pros and cons in her heart. Judging from Yun Yao and Ji Tianqing's reactions, they probably don't know about it yet. However, I lost my composure just now and aroused their suspicions. This matter can't be kept a secret. As long as they investigate carefully, they will definitely find out. As she thought of this, Luo Li had an idea. She looked up at Ji Tianqing and said calmly, "I have a piece of good news and a piece of bad news. Which one do you want to hear first?" Ji Tianqing and Yun Yao looked at each other and asked, "What's the good news? What's the bad news?" Luo Li squeezed out a smile and said, "The good news is, congratulations on becoming a father." "What?" Ji Tianqing's body shook and his eyes widened in surprise. I'm a father? You mean Yao Yao is pregnant with my child?" He muttered in disbelief and slowly turned his head to look at Yun Yao's abdomen. Yun Yao's figure hadn't changed and her abdomen was still as flat as before. However, he seemed to see that there was a cute little life in Yun Yao's abdomen. Yun Yao was also stunned. She quickly covered her mouth with her hand and didn't let out a cry of surprise. After she came back to her senses, she was also surprised and looked down at her abdomen. At this moment, she suddenly recalled all the strange reactions she had before and finally understood. No wonder I had a strange reaction when I was cultivating in seclusion. No wonder there was a mysterious force that helped me block most of the power of the heavenly thunder when I was going through the heavenly tribulation. It turns out that I was pregnant with Tianqing's child. Our child. Yun Yao and Ji Tianqing were the same. They were both immersed in great joy and were quite excited. If Luo Li hadn't pointed it out, they wouldn't have thought about it and wouldn't have thought that a little life was about to be born. However, Ji Tianqing calmed down quickly. He stopped smiling and looked at Luo Li with a frown. He asked, "Divine Official Luo, what's the bad news?" Luo Li sighed with a serious expression and said in a low voice, "The two of you are about to have a child." This is a joyous matter. However, the problem of Yao Yao's missing soul hasn't been solved yet. She's still in a dangerous situation. However, this little life came at this time. It's very dangerous for the mother and child. Ji Tianqing furrowed his brows, his eyes filled with worry. Yunyao was anxious and asked, Luo Li, didn't you bring the holy medicine? I'll be fine after I take it. Luo Li shook her head. Even if you take the holy medicine, it can only stabilize your soul temporarily. It can't cure it completely. If you want to solve this problem completely, you have to gather your 3 spiritual and 7 physical souls. Moreover, the little life in your body is very unusual. I'm afraid it's not an ordinary life. In your current state, giving birth to such a life will put you in an even more dangerous situation. Ji Tianqing thought for a while and asked in a low voice, Divine Official Luo, what's going on? Is there something wrong with our child? Luo Li didn't answer directly. Instead, she asked, half a year ago, when I was treating Yao Yao's injuries, I asked the 2 of you to stay in separate rooms. Did you do that in the past half a year? It was not convenient for Ji Tianqing to discuss such an awkward question. Only Yunyao could answer it. She nodded and said in a calm tone, Of course, I did it. Luo Li's eyes flashed and she said in a serious tone, That means the 2 of you slept together half a year ago and got pregnant at that time. However, half a year has passed and Yunyao's body hasn't changed much. Your child has just grown. Hearing this, Ji Tianqing and Yunyao were enlightened. Under normal circumstances, the human race will give birth after 10 months. However, our child hasn't shown any signs of movement for half a year. Luo Li nodded and said in a serious tone, Therefore, your child is extraordinary and needs a long time to be born. Chapter 1812. Everyone knew that martial arts powerhouses had a harder time giving birth to children than ordinary people. However, the children of powerful martial arts powerhouses were bound to be extraordinary. Whether it was bloodline inheritance, spiritual power, or innate talent, they all far surpassed ordinary people. Most importantly, many powerhouses with extraordinary innate talent had a very long process of giving birth to children. In the martial arts world, there were all sorts of bizarre legends. For example, there was a certain martial saint from 8,000 years ago who was the sage emperor of a certain empire. His sage empress was a descendant of an ancient noble family and had a special bloodline. Her strength had also reached the martial saint realm. The 2 martial saints had been married for hundreds of years, but they had not given birth to any children. It was not until 1,000 years later that the sage empress finally became pregnant, but it took her 9 years to give birth. The child that was born after 9 years had been born with the bloodline and spiritual power of his parents, and his innate talent was even more monstrous than his parents. In just a dozen years, the child had reached the primordial spirit realm. 50 years later, he had become a tribulation stage powerhouse. Then, in just 100 years, he had become a martial saint powerhouse, and his name had shaken the entire Shenwu continent. There were many similar stories that would appear every few hundred years. However, only that powerhouse who had become a martial saint in 100 years had been hailed as a peerless genius that had not appeared in 3,000 years. His legendary deeds were still being spread throughout the Shenwu continent. Another example was that in ancient times, there had been an ancient and powerful clan called the Heavenly Spirit Clan. The spiritual leaders of the Heavenly Spirit Clan had been 2 heavenly spirit gods. The 2 deities were a man and a woman. They had become husband and wife and ruled the entire clan together. They had been together for 3,000 years, and it had not been easy for them to give birth to a divine child. That divine child had been in his mother's womb for 18 years before he was born. However, he had been a prodigy from birth. Not only did he possess extraordinary strength, but he also possessed extraordinary intellect. When the prodigy was 6 years old, he had already become a martial saint. He was the youngest martial saint in the history of the martial world. It was a pity that the two heavenly spirit gods had died in battle during the ancient war of the gods. The prodigy who had become a martial saint at the age of 6 had also died prematurely. Ji Tianqing and Yunyao had heard of similar legends and read about them in some ancient books. Therefore, the two of them did not panic or worry. Instead, they were pleasantly surprised. Both of us have unparalleled talent. When our child is born in the future, he will definitely be more outstanding than us. With our current strength, it's very difficult to conceive a child. Fortunately, the heavens have blessed us and given us this great surprise. Ji Tianqing and Yunyao stared at each other, their hearts filled with joy and anticipation. Luoli hesitated for a moment before replying with a calm expression, "Although this is a joyous occasion, your children will definitely not be ordinary. However, I have to remind you that Yao Yao's condition is different from ordinary people. She is not suitable to have this child. If anything happened, not only would the child be lost, even Yao Yao would lose her life. So, for the sake of Yao Yao's safety, I suggest you." Without waiting for Luoli to finish her words, Yunyao interrupted her and said in a firm tone, "No. No matter how dangerous it is, I will never give up on this child." Which mother would give up on her child? Moreover, this is a treasure that the heavens have bestowed upon me and Tianqing. Luoli sighed helplessly. She knew that once she had made up her mind, she would not change it easily. Therefore, she stopped persuading Yunyao and turned to Ji Tianqing. She asked, "Ji Tianqing, what's your decision?" Ji Tianqing thought for a moment and said solemnly, "I have the same thoughts as Yao Yao. This child was not easy to come by. It is the fruit of our hard work. We will not give it up. Even if Yao Yao is pregnant with this child, there will be some accidents and dangers. We will face them correctly and try to resolve the danger." Luoli frowned. She wanted to persuade them again, but she found it difficult to speak. In the end, she could only remain silent and sigh in her heart. Sigh. Yao Yao is pregnant now, and only the three of us know about this. In the future, if Yao Yao shows signs of pregnancy or the child is born, this matter will definitely not be able to be hidden. If the people of the kingdom of God knew that the holy goddess, the future god, had already gotten married and had a child, I wonder how big of a storm it would cause? Luoli was worried when she thought of this. She was worried about the future of the kingdom of God and Yunyao's reputation. After a long time, Luoli suppressed her chaotic thoughts and said to Ji Tianqing and Yunyao, "I have already told you about the pros and cons of this matter. Since you both insist on giving birth to this child, no one can force you. However, you must remember to let Yao Yao rest peacefully and not put yourself in danger. In addition, if Yao Yao's body has any abnormalities, you must inform me immediately. I will find a way to help you." After speaking, Luoli took out 2 jade slips and placed them on the table. Then, she took the medicine box and left. Yunyao took the 2 jade slips and asked the Black Eagle to send Luoli out. Only Ji Tianqing and Yunyao were left in the room, and it suddenly became quiet. Ji Tianqing walked to Yunyao and held her hands. He looked at her gently and said in a sincere tone, "Yao Yao, thank you. I have made you suffer." Yunyao shook her head gently and said with a smile, "Tianqing, don't thank me. This is our luck and my blessing. My biggest wish is to marry you and grow old hand in hand. Then, I will give birth to a pair of children for you. Only then will I be happy. Now that God has blessed me, I have already fulfilled half of my wish. I am very satisfied." Ji Tianqing took her into his arms and said in a firm tone, "No matter what danger or difficulty there is, I will never back down. Even if I have to sacrifice my life, I will protect you and your children." Yunyao shook her head again and said in a solemn tone, "No, we will never let anything happen to you. 3 people is a family. We will always be together. Ji Tianqing nodded and held her tightly in his arms. He used his heart to feel her heartbeat and the little life in her belly. What was incredible was that the little life that hadn't taken shape yet emitted a slight aura fluctuation and gently touched Ji Tianqing's body. That feeling was like a curious baby greeting him. After Luoli left Yunyao's place, she stayed in another courtyard of the Cloud Water Palace. She waved her hand and asked the two maids to leave. Then, she sat alone in front of the white jade table with a worried face. She rubbed her eyebrows painfully and sighed to herself, sigh. Yao Yao, oh Yao Yao, you are really good at giving me problems. How am I going to report and explain to the Divine Master after such a big thing happened? The future master of the Luo Water God Kingdom, the noble goddess Yaoguang, is marrying an ordinary man. This is shocking enough. You're tuning into the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.